Section 1. The Nuclear Heart of Springfield. Take a slow breath and get comfortable. Pull your blanket a little tighter, settle into whatever position feels right, and let the world outside go quiet for a while. Because tonight, we are going to spend some time in a town you already know. A town with a yellow sky and a perpetually smoking power plant on the hill. A town where nothing ever really changes, and everything is somehow always fine. We are going to Springfield. And I want to tell you about the secrets hiding underneath it. Not the jokes, not the guest appearances, not the couch gags or the chalkboard punchlines. The real secrets. The ones buried so deep inside 36 years of animation that most people have never stopped long enough to notice them. The patterns that keep appearing across season after season. The questions the show introduces and then quietly walks away from. The theories that are so carefully supported by what actually happens on screen that even the people who made the show have had to address them. There is a version of Springfield that lives beneath the surface of the one we all grew up watching. It is stranger than the cartoon. It is darker than the comedy. And once you see it, the way you watch this show will never quite be the same. So let your eyes go heavy. Let your breathing slow down. And come with me to a town called Springfield. A town built on a secret so enormous, so quietly catastrophic, that it explains almost every single strange thing that has ever happened there. Let us start at the very center of it all. The Springfield nuclear power plant sits on a hill at the edge of town like a monument to something nobody ever agreed to build. Two cooling towers perpetually venting steam into an already hazy sky. A chain-link fence around the perimeter, rusted at the corners. A parking lot full of cars, belonging to workers who have been coming here for decades, breathing this air, going home to their families, and never once asking the question that should have occurred to all of them on the very first day. What is this place doing to us? The plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor, owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns, the oldest and wealthiest man in Springfield. It provides electrical power to the entire town. It employs a significant portion of Springfield's working population. And by any reasonable standard you care to apply, it is one of the most dangerous industrial facilities that has ever been depicted in any form of fiction. A safety inspection, an actual documented safety inspection that appears in the show, found 342 violations. Not 3 or 4, not a handful of minor paperwork issues. 342 separate, documented failures to meet even the most basic standards of nuclear safety. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code was $56 million. Burns refused to spend it. Not because he couldn't afford it. Burns is a billionaire many times over. He refused because fixing the problems would mean acknowledging they existed. And acknowledging they existed would mean that someone, somewhere, might start asking the question he had spent decades making sure nobody ever asked. What have these problems already done to the people living nearby? The violations themselves are not abstract regulatory checkboxes. They are visceral. Radioactive waste being dumped directly into local bodies of water. Radioactive waste being left on children's playgrounds. Plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's actual desk. Cooling towers that were cracked, structurally compromised towers in an active nuclear facility and repaired with a piece of chewing gum. Luminous rats in the walls. And then there is the detail the show drops so casually that most viewers don't register it at all. Human skeletons in the basement. Actual human remains. Inside an operating nuclear reactor. The show shows you the bones. A character glances at them. And then the scene moves on. And nobody asks who those people were, how they got there, or how they died. Springfield's nuclear power plant has a basement full of human skeletons, and the show treats it like background detail. The man whose literal job description is to prevent this facility from poisoning the surrounding area is Homer Simpson, a man the show's own creator has said has an IQ of 55. A man who, in a later episode, discovers that a crayon has been lodged in his brain since childhood, physically reducing his cognitive function. Homer sleeps at his workstation. He eats donuts during meltdown warnings. He once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see what would happen to it. That is the safety inspector of the plant standing between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe. And he has been standing there, failing at that job, for over 3 decades. Now, here is where the theory that explains all of Springfield begins to take shape. The very first visible sign of mutation in Springfield appears in Season 2. A fish named Blinky. A three-eyed fish, pulled from the river near the power plant, and when Blinky appears, the show treats it as news. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as campaign ammunition, holding the fish up as evidence that Burns is contaminating the local water supply. Burns is eventually cornered into eating the fish on live television to prove it is harmless. The town watches. There is a brief moment of civic concern, and then everyone goes home, and life continues, and the river is never tested again. Nobody asks the obvious follow-up question. If the fish in that river have developed a third eye, what is happening to the people who have been drinking the water from that same river for their entire lives? The answer has been visible on screen since the very first episode. Look at the residents of Springfield. Really look at them. Homer has a skull shape that does not correspond to normal human biology. Marge has hair that defies physics, growing vertically to a height that has never changed in 36 years. Bart's spiky hair maintains its shape without product. Lisa's hair has 7 points, a pattern that occurs nowhere in nature. Every single resident of Springfield has 4 fingers on each hand. Every single resident of Springfield has yellow skin, and nobody finds this worth remarking on. But here is the detail that makes the radiation theory click into something much more substantial than a fan theory. When guest characters arrive in Springfield from outside the town, when celebrities visit, when characters from elsewhere in the country appear in an episode, they look different. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are less exaggerated. Their features more closely resemble normal human anatomy. The show draws outsiders differently from residents. The most common explanation is that this is simply the art style, that this is just how The Simpsons looks. And that explanation works perfectly well if you accept it without thinking about it. But within the actual logic of the show's own universe, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live inside Springfield and people who do not. And the difference aligns precisely with what you would expect from a population that has been chronically exposed to radiation. The people inside the contamination zone look mutated. The people outside it look like people. The animals are affected too. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes and unusual proportions as his owners. The wildlife near the plant is demonstrably altered by the runoff. The show tells you this directly. It shows you Blinky and says, "Here, this is what this plant does to living organisms." And then it expects you to believe that the same radiation has had no effect whatsoever on the humans living in the same environment. Burns, of course, knows. The show makes this explicit across multiple episodes. In the episode called The Springfield Files, Homer encounters what he believes is an alien in the woods near town. The FBI investigates. The entire town goes into a mild panic. And when the truth finally emerges, the creature in the woods is not an alien at all. It is Mr. Burns, after one of his weekly medical treatments. A treatment so intensive, so saturated with chemicals and radiation therapy, that it causes Burns's body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without it, he dies. He wanders out of the facility in a dazed state, stumbling through the trees, glowing in the dark. And the people of Springfield see this luminous figure in the forest and immediately conclude, alien. Not the power plant, not radiation. Not the obvious explanation that is staring them directly in the face. They look at their employer, glowing like a lantern in the woods, and their minds go to outer space. That is how deep the denial runs in this town. And in the Simpsons movie, the evidence becomes impossible to dismiss. Environmental contamination in Springfield reaches a point so severe, so well documented, that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency operating within the show's universe, determines that the town must be physically sealed under a massive glass dome to prevent its pollution from spreading to the rest of the country. Think about that. The United States government looked at Springfield and concluded that the entire town was so toxic, so fundamentally contaminated, that the only viable solution was containment. Springfield is classified as an environmental hazard by the federal government. The people inside it, everyone who has been drinking that water, breathing that air, living downwind of those cracked cooling towers, they are still inside when the dome goes up. And Burns knows what he has been doing. He has always known. He funds private medical research. He has personal physicians on retainer. He undergoes weekly treatments that essentially amount to controlled nuclear maintenance of his own body. Burns understands what radiation does to biological systems because radiation is what keeps him alive. He has the resources, the infrastructure, and the scientific knowledge to synthesize the kind of experimental treatments that no one else in Springfield could access. He knows what his plant is doing to Springfield because Springfield is his laboratory. And Homer's continued employment is not a mistake. It is not Burns being forgetful or negligent. It is strategy, deliberately maintained. When German investors briefly purchased the plant, the first thing they did was fire Homer. The second thing they did was assess the cost of bringing the facility up to code and nearly went bankrupt from the estimate. Burns bought the plant back. He rehired Homer the same day. A competent safety inspector would shut that plant down within a week. Homer ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking. The water stays contaminated. And Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's power supply, its economy, and by extension, its entire population. A population that is, by this point, too neurologically compromised by decades of chronic radiation exposure to look up at those cracked cooling towers and ask the simplest, most basic question available to them. Why are we all like this? The theory does not stop at explaining the physical mutations. It explains the cognitive ones too. Homer's IQ, the town's collective inability to process information, the tendency of Springfield residents to forget catastrophic events between episodes, the way Burns has operated in plain sight for over a century without anyone mounting a serious challenge to his authority. The crayon in Homer's brain is the show's most vivid image of this, but it is not an isolated case. It is a symbol. In season 12, the crayon is removed, and Homer's IQ rises dramatically. He becomes articulate, perceptive, capable of understanding his own life with a clarity he has never had before. And when that clarity arrives, what does Homer see? He sees Springfield for what it really is. He sees his job. He sees the architecture of his own suffering. And it is so unbearable that he asks for the crayon to be put back in. He chooses to be less intelligent, because being intelligent in Springfield is worse than being numb. But the show never asks the most haunting follow-up question embedded in that storyline. How did a crayon end up lodged in a child's brain without any medical professional noticing it? Homer visited doctors throughout his childhood and adolescence. He had checkups in Springfield. Not one of those doctors ever found a foreign object in his skull. Either every doctor in Springfield is incompetent beyond comprehension, or someone in the medical establishment knew the crayon was there and chose to leave it. If Burns' influence extends into Springfield's healthcare infrastructure and the show gives us every reason to believe it does, then Homer's crayon is not an accident. It is maintenance. It is the system ensuring that the man in Sector 7G stays exactly as manageable as he needs to be. The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about The Simpsons. It explains all of them. The characters do not age because chronic radiation exposure has altered their biology at the cellular level. The town resets after catastrophic events because the population's capacity for sustained critical thinking has been damaged by decades of neurological exposure. Homer survives injuries that should kill him because his body has adapted to the contaminated environment in ways that make it nearly indestructible, even as it remains cognitively limited. Burns stays alive through interventions that would be fatal to a normal human because he has been managing his own nuclear exposure for over a century with resources that nobody else in town can access. Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town with eccentric residents. Springfield is a contamination zone. The residents are not eccentric, they are symptomatic. And the nuclear power plant that dominates the skyline, that provides the electricity, that employs the neighbors and poisons the water and irradiates the children, is not a background gag. It is the cause. It has always been the cause. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery from a fatal injury, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, every unexplained mystery in 36 years of this show traces back to the same cracked cooling towers, leaking the same invisible poison into the same water supply, feeding the same damaged minds that cannot figure out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children have 4 fingers. The Springfield nuclear power plant is not just part of the show, it is the show. And nobody in Springfield will ever understand that, because the plant already made sure they cannot. If you are still with me, if your eyes are getting a little heavier but your mind is still following the thread, drop a comment below with the time where you are and where you are watching from. There is something quietly wonderful about knowing how many different places and time zones this story is reaching tonight. And if you want more evenings like this one, the subscribe button is right there. It costs nothing, and it means the next night you need somewhere calm to settle, we will be here. Section 2, Homer's Coma and the Dream That Never Ended. Let everything from that last section sit for a moment. Let the weight of it settle. Because now we are going to approach Springfield from a completely different angle. And this particular angle changes what the radiation theory means. It changes what every theory means. Because what if everything we just discussed, the mutations, the strange physics, the impossible survivals, the resets, what if all of it is correct, but only inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since 1993? On April the 1st, 1993, the 18th episode of Season 4 aired. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was simple enough. Bart plays an escalating series of April Fool's pranks on Homer, each one more elaborate than the last, until he takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and places it inside an industrial paint shaker. When Homer opens the can, the explosion sends him straight to the hospital. So far, so Simpsons. But then something happens that the show treats as a brief comedic beat and never fully reckons with. Homer, lying in his hospital bed, spots a vending machine across the room. He tries to reach the candy inside. The machine tips over. It falls on him, and Homer Simpson flatlines. He enters a clinically unconscious state, a real coma, not a dream sequence, not a cutaway gag that the show explicitly states lasts 7 weeks. The episode ends with Homer waking up. Bart confesses at his bedside. Homer immediately starts strangling him. The family laughs. Everything resets. The next episode arrives and Springfield continues as if nothing of significance occurred. Except for one detail. One small detail the show mentions in the final moments of that episode and then never mentions again. Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5% gone permanently, never returning. His response when told this is to laugh. He says he does not understand why he is laughing. The family finds it charming rather than alarming. That is the last time the coma is addressed directly, unless it was never really over. This is the Homer coma theory, and it is the most internally consistent, most emotionally resonant, and most widely discussed fan theory in the entire history of The Simpsons. The basic premise is this. Homer did not wake up from his coma in April 1993. Everything that has aired since that date, every storyline, every character development, every impossible event, every guest appearance, every surreal adventure is a dream being generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly losing brain function, while his family sits beside him and waits for him to open his eyes. To understand why this theory holds together so well, you have to understand what The Simpsons looked like before the coma episode. In the first 4 seasons, the show is recognizably grounded. That word gets used a lot in descriptions of early Simpsons, and it is the right word. The storylines deal with human problems that real families encounter. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers whether she is genuinely happy in her marriage. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher and has her heart quietly broken when he leaves. Bart faces the real possibility of being held back a year in school. These are not dramatic crises. They are the small-scale tensions of ordinary domestic life, filtered through satire but rooted in something recognizable. The emotional core of early Simpsons is financial anxiety and family pressure. Homer works a job he does not love because it pays the bills. Marge tries to hold everything together because she is the one who keeps the household functional. The children navigate a world that frequently disappoints them. It is funny, but it is also true in the particular way that good comedy is always a little bit true. Then the coma happens, and everything changes. Not gradually, not in the slow drift that sometimes happens when a show runs long enough. The change is seismic. After season 4, Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society. Homer discovers that his mother is a fugitive political radical. Homer meets God not once, but twice. He holds dozens of unrelated jobs in episodes that treat each new profession as a fresh start with no connection to what came before. He travels to countries across the world. He befriends celebrities. He survives physical disasters that would kill a battalion of soldiers. The show goes from a family sitcom grounded in economic anxiety to something closer to a surreal picaresque, where the main character can be anything and do anything and the consequences never carry forward. The escalation is so dramatic that even casual fans have noticed the tonal shift. The long-running internet debate about when The Simpsons declined almost always traces back to somewhere around season 8 or 9. The coma theory offers a more precise answer. The Simpsons did not decline. Homer's brain got worse. And the further you get from April 1993, the further the dream gets from anything that resembles ordinary life. There is a detail in the coma theory that is easy to miss because it requires going back 6 months before the coma episode itself. In the season 4 premiere, Homer the Heretic, Homer has an actual conversation with God, face to face. A real theological exchange, complete with divine presence and divine voice. And during that conversation, God tells Homer something specific. He tells Homer that he will one day understand the meaning of life, but not yet. Not now. His time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. If you read that as foreshadowing, which the coma theory encourages you to do, then God was telling Homer in September of 1992 that his conscious life was approaching its end, that the dream was about to begin, that everything Homer would experience from a certain point forward would not be the world as it is, but the world as Homer's mind needs it to be. The aging problem is where the coma theory becomes genuinely difficult to argue against. Nobody in Springfield ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have not gained a wrinkle or a gray hair in the entire history of the show. Every other theory that attempts to explain this has to work relatively hard to get there. The radiation theory invokes mutated biology and cellular alteration. The cartoon logic explanation simply says that animated shows work this way. Both of those explanations have merit. But the coma theory has the simplest answer of all. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went to sleep in April of 1993 and never woke up. Homer's unconscious brain cannot imagine his children growing older because he was not there to see it happen. The last time he saw Bart, Bart was 10. The last time he saw Lisa, she was 8. The last time he held Maggie, she was 1 year old. His memory of them is frozen at the moment the vending machine fell. And in the dream, they stay exactly as he remembers them. That is what the unconscious mind does during extended periods of unconsciousness. It holds the world still at the last moment it experienced it. It runs the world forward using the only reference material it has, which is memory. And memory cannot age the people inside it, because memory is not a camera, it is a feeling. It preserves people as they were when they mattered most, and it does not update without new information to work with. Homer's dream preserves Springfield precisely as it was on the day he lost it. The celebrity appearances that flood later seasons make sense under this framework too. Homer's brain, lying in a hospital bed, receives ambient stimuli from the world outside its skull, sounds from the television in the room, conversations happening at the bedside, music from somewhere down the corridor, names and voices and fragments of cultural reference drifting through the fog of unconsciousness. And the dreaming brain does what dreaming brains do. It absorbs those fragments and weaves them into the narrative it is already building. Every celebrity who walks through Springfield streets in a later season is, under this reading, a voice Homer heard through the haze, a name someone mentioned while sitting beside his bed, a figure from a television program playing at low volume in the background. His mind identifies the voice and builds a character around it, dropping that character into the dream for an episode and then releasing them when the memory fades. The more stimuli Homer's brain receives from the outside world, the more elaborate and diverse the dream becomes. This is why later seasons have more guest appearances, more global adventures, more impossible scenarios. It is not that the writers ran out of ideas and started reaching. It is that Homer's brain, weakening over time, is drawing on a wider and less organized pool of input to keep the simulation running. The show has acknowledged this theory directly. In season 34, the episode Lisa the Boy Scout includes what was described as a deliberately leaked, fake deleted scene in which Homer wakes from a long coma to reveal that every outlandish episode was indeed a dream. The show's writers created this scene as a deliberate nod to the theory. They animated it. They showed Homer waking up, And then they said it was not real, that it was a hoax inserted by hackers, that none of it counted. But the fact that they made it at all tells you something important about how the people who write this show think about the coma theory. They have engaged with it seriously enough to animate a conclusion for it. They have acknowledged that it holds together. And their denial, their official insistence that Homer is not in a coma, arrived wrapped inside an episode that depicted Homer waking from a coma. They showed you the answer and told you it was a joke. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory in a 2015 interview. He said it was not true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. But what he did not do, what he conspicuously declined to address, was explain the tonal shift after season 4. He did not explain why nobody ages. He did not explain the significance of God's words in the season 4 premiere. He did not explain why the show has become progressively more surreal and detached from reality with each passing season, in a pattern that precisely matches what you would expect from a deteriorating brain struggling to maintain a coherent dream. He said it was not true, and the conversation moved on. But the theory did not move on, because it does something no official explanation has ever managed to do. It makes the entire show make sense. All of it. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the celebrity parade, the increasingly cartoonish plots, the reset button that erases consequences between episodes, the fact that Homer can survive anything, endure anything, recover from anything because nothing is actually happening to his body. His body is in a hospital bed. Only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind cannot kill him, because his mind is the one telling the story. But here is the part that stays with you long after the theory itself has settled. The part that turns what might seem like a clever intellectual puzzle into something that actually moves you. If the coma theory is true, then the emotional core of The Simpsons is not comedy. It is grief. Homer's deepest, most desperate wish. The wish that drives every episode. The wish that underlies every reset and every impossible survival and every moment where everything comes back together by the end of the half hour is so simple that it almost hurts to say it directly. He wants his family. That is it. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous, infuriating, wonderful boy. He wants Lisa to still play her saxophone, still argue with him, still look at him with that expression that is equal parts exasperation and tenderness. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold, still young enough to need him. He wants Friday night at the Simpson house to last forever. And in the coma, it does. The dream gives Homer the only thing he ever really wanted. His family, preserved exactly as he remembers them. His children never growing up, never leaving, never becoming the versions of themselves he will not be awake to witness. His wife never older, never tired, never alone in that house on Evergreen Terrace with photographs of children who moved away. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is the only heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. A house where the kids are always young, where the beer is always cold, where the world keeps presenting problems and Homer keeps stumbling through them, and somehow, impossibly, everything always turns out fine by Sunday night at 8 o'clock. The coma theory does not ruin The Simpsons. It transforms it. Every episode becomes an act of love. A dying man dreaming about his family because his family is the only thing worth dreaming about. And every time Homer survives something impossible, every time the world resets, every time the credits roll and the house on Evergreen Terrace is quiet and intact, it is not lazy writing. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, Homer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed, how old his children really are, whether Marge is still there, whether anyone is still sitting beside his bed, or whether the chair has been empty for a long time now, or whether he will not wake up at all. Every episode since April 1993 is a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he cannot reach. The show will never confirm it, but it will never disprove it either, because the evidence is not hidden in clues or Easter eggs. It is baked into the structure of the show itself. Nobody ages. Reality keeps getting stranger, and Homer always finds his way home by the end of the episode because in his dream, he never really left. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Let your body get a little heavier. There is nothing you need to do right now except follow the story. We are going to talk about a mystery now. The greatest mystery in the history of The Simpsons, and arguably the greatest mystery in the history of American animated television. One that has a supposedly definitive answer, on record confirmed by the show, accepted as canon, and yet the more carefully you examine that answer, the more it begins to unravel. We are going back to the summer of 1995. In the spring of that year, The Simpsons did something no animated show had ever attempted before. It staged a genuine, carefully constructed murder mystery, or attempted murder mystery, with a cliffhanger ending designed to keep the country guessing for an entire summer. Season 6 ended with Mr. Burns shot and left for dead, and the audience was invited to figure out who did it. Fox promoted it with the kind of energy usually reserved for actual news events. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special treating the fictional shooting as an unsolved case. A national contest was launched, inviting viewers to submit their guess and compete to be animated into a future episode. The Simpsons was not just a television show that summer. It was a national puzzle. To understand why so many people cared, you need to understand what Burns had done to earn a bullet. By the end of Season 6's final episode, Mr. Burns had systematically dismantled the lives of almost every significant person in Springfield. He had drilled for oil directly beneath Springfield Elementary, destroying the school's budget and eliminating the music and arts programs. He had financially crushed Moe's Tavern through a scheme that forced its closure. He had created a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield Retirement Castle. He had injured Santa's little helper. And then, for his grand finale, he had constructed an enormous mechanical sun-blocking disc and positioned it over Springfield to deny the entire town natural sunlight, forcing every resident to purchase their electricity from his plant around the clock. He did not just ruin individual lives, he stole the sun. When Smithers, loyal, devoted, perpetually enabling Smithers, objected to this plan, Burns fired him on the spot. The one person who had stood by Burns through every crime and every cruelty let go in an instant, because Smithers had the audacity to suggest that stealing the sun from an entire town might be a step too far. By the end of Part 1, every person in Springfield had a genuine, documented motive to want Burns dead. Homer, because Burns had been unable to learn his name despite Homer working for him for years, a humiliation so constant and so absolute that it had worn Homer down to a kind of furious resignation. Bart and Lisa, because the school funding was gone. Grandpa, because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he lost his job. Tito Puente, because the music program was cut. Moe, because his bar was finished. Even Smithers, freshly fired and descending into alcoholism, had motive. The entire town gathered at a public meeting. Multiple characters were visibly armed. The tension in that room was real, and Burns walked into it without hesitation, and then he was shot. He staggered to the town sundial and collapsed, his hands falling on 2 letters. Depending on how you read the dial, those letters were either W and S, or, from Burns's own perspective, lying face down M and S. America waited the entire summer. When Part 2 aired in September 1995, the investigation played out as a comedic procedural. Chief Wiggum and the Springfield Police Department stumbled through the evidence with their characteristic incompetence. Smithers confessed almost immediately, but his confession collapsed when the timeline revealed he had been blackout drunk at the time and had actually shot someone else, old Jasper, in his wooden leg, nowhere near Burns. Not the right victim, not the right location, not the right crime. The investigation ground through its list of suspects one by one. Principal Skinner had an alibi. Moe had an alibi. Tito Puente provided what remains one of the greatest alibis in the history of television, a full musical number, performed with a live band, explaining that he had channeled his rage into music rather than violence. Samba, specifically. Then the police found an eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA analysis traced it to a member of the Simpson family. Homer's fingerprints were on the gun. Homer, with the clearest and most emotionally loaded motive in the entire cast, was arrested. He was nearly convicted, and then Burns woke up. He identified his attacker. It was Maggie, he said. Baby Maggie Simpson. According to Burns, he had encountered her in the parking lot after the town meeting. He had attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from its holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. The official answer, Baby did it. Case closed. Except the contest that Fox had built the entire summer around did not produce a winner. Not a real one. According to the DVD commentary for these episodes, not a single person in the randomly selected sample of entries had guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The person who received the prize was chosen randomly from the pool, and since she had not correctly identified Maggie as the shooter, she was given a cash payment instead of being animated into the show. The one person who actually posted the correct answer online on a Simpsons news group on the night the first episode aired was using a college internet account that had since gone inactive. The producers could not track that person down. They issued an open invitation on the DVD release for that person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think about what this means. The show's creators designed a mystery. They invited the entire country to solve it. They explicitly said it was solvable from the clues. And when the answer came, essentially nobody had worked it out. The clues were either insufficient, the red herrings were too effective, or the answer did not logically follow from the evidence the way the show claimed it did. Now look at the sundial. Burns's hands point to W and S. The show tells you this stands for Maggie Simpson. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. But Burns himself stated on camera, canonically, that his hands pointing at those letters was not intentional. He was not deliberately spelling out his attacker's initials. He simply fell. The sundial clue, the central piece of evidence, the image that was promoted all summer as the key to the mystery, was explicitly described by the victim as a coincidence. The greatest clue in Simpsons history is meaningless, according to the person it supposedly came from. Then there is the gun itself. Burns carried a gun in a holster. Shortly before the shooting, the holster is shown empty. The gun was already missing from his person before the attack. Whoever shot Burns did not bring their own weapon. They used his. This means the shooter was someone who did not arrive at the town meeting armed. Someone who did not plan to shoot anyone that night. Someone who found the gun by chance and acted impulsively rather than with premeditation. A baby picking up a gun from the ground fits that profile, but so does almost any other character present who was not carrying their own weapon. And Burns's last words, spoken just before the shot was fired, "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not surprised. He was not afraid. He said it's you the way you greet someone familiar, someone you have seen before, someone you do not consider a threat. Does Mr. Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? Has he ever had a meaningful interaction with her before this episode? The show does not establish a relationship between them. Burns barely recognizes Homer, and Homer works for him every day. The idea that Burns would look at a baby and say, "Oh, it's you?" in a tone of calm familiarity does not fit with what we know about how Burns processes other people. In season 18, Homer claims on camera that he was actually the one who shot Burns. He says it directly. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the wealthiest man in Springfield, and the show treats it as a throwaway line. Either Homer is lying for attention entirely possible given his character, or the original verdict was wrong. And if Homer did it, then Maggie was framed. A 1-year-old child was blamed for a crime she did not commit. And the evidence that supposedly proved her guilt, the DNA analysis, the sundial, the testimony of a man who had just woken from a coma with a bullet wound in him, was either manufactured, misinterpreted, or both. There is another theory, built by a careful reading of what the show actually establishes about these characters, that points not at Homer but at Marge. The case is surprisingly coherent. Marge is a devoted mother who watched Burns destroy her children's school, injure her dog, and steal the sun from her family's sky. She had every reason to want him stopped. More significantly, the show had previously established in the episode Marge Gets a Job that Burns developed a genuine romantic fixation on Marge. He was infatuated with her, and the theory argues that this is why Burns would not identify Marge as the shooter. He took the bullet. He woke up. He saw the woman he had been obsessed with standing in the light of a hospital room, and rather than send her to prison, he pointed at the sundial and let the town draw its own conclusions. Maggie became the answer because Maggie was convenient. Chief Wiggum says it himself. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect outcome for anyone who wanted to protect the real shooter. An infant too young to deny the accusation, too young to understand what she was being accused of, and too young to ever face consequences for it. The alternate endings complicate the official story further. A complete alternate conclusion was produced in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter. fully animated, fully voiced, ready to air. This ending was eventually shown in The Simpsons' 138th episode Spectacular, where it is dismissed because it would require ignoring the Simpson DNA evidence, which the show compares, explicitly, to the O.J. Simpson trial. The show is telling you that ignoring DNA evidence to reach a convenient verdict happens in the real world. It is winking at you. It is telling you that evidence can be pointed in whatever direction the people in power need it to point. An early draft of the script had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers seriously considered this option because they could not decide what to do with his character and thought prison might be an interesting direction for him. This was abandoned. But the point is that the answer was not fixed by the clues in Part 1. The clues were adjusted to match whichever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was reverse engineered. And here is the question that the official answer never adequately addresses. In a town where every single person had a genuine motive, where dozens of characters were visibly armed at the town meeting, where Burns had just committed what amounts to environmental terrorism against an entire community, how is it possible that only one person acted? Springfield is not a town known for calm or restraint. These are people who form mobs over trivial misunderstandings. They riot with very little provocation. They burned down their own town hall once because of a misunderstanding involving a bear. But when Burns blocks out the sun and threatens every living thing in the community, only one trigger is pulled. Either something about the official story is incomplete, or someone with access, with knowledge of Burns's schedule and his gun and the layout of that parking lot, arranged for the right suspect to be in the right place at the right moment. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The show committed to it. But the contest that nobody won, the sundial that Burns himself said was meaningless, the alternate endings that were fully produced, Homer's unexamined confession, and the final shot of Maggie alone in a room, checking that no one is watching before making a gesture that mimics pulling a trigger, all of it suggests that the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never actually solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, those are very different things. Section 4. The impossible longevity of Charles Montgomery Burns. The room is quiet now. Your breathing is slower. Stay with me just a little longer, because we have not yet talked about the oldest person in Springfield. We have not yet asked the question that the show has been dancing around for 36 seasons without ever fully committing to an answer. How is Mr. Burns still alive? This is not a rhetorical question. This is not a request to invoke cartoon logic. Within the established canon of The Simpsons, Charles Montgomery Plantagenet Schicklgruber Burns is a medical impossibility. His age has been stated, implied, and contradicted across dozens of episodes, but every version of the available timeline places his birth somewhere in the late 1800s. He has referenced personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has told first-hand stories about events from the 1910s. He has described working relationships with historical figures who died before most of the show's current audience was born. By the most conservative estimate, Burns is comfortably over 100 years old. By the most generous reading of the show's continuity, he may be approaching 140, and he does not simply exist. He functions. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with genuine strategic competence. He manipulates municipal and state-level politics. He orchestrates schemes that require sustained cognitive effort, long-term planning, and a working understanding of modern finance, modern law, and modern technology. His body is frail. Yes, there is a running joke about his inability to physically interact with the world in any meaningful way, but his mind is sharp. Mr. Burns is arguably the most strategically intelligent character in Springfield, and he has been operating at that level for longer than any human being should be capable of sustained consciousness. The show addresses this directly in the Springfield Files, which we touched on in the first section. Burns undergoes a weekly medical regimen so extreme that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Without it, he dies. The margin for error is 0. His life is maintained the way a machine is maintained. Through scheduled servicing, miss one appointment, and the system fails. The treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological functions. Burns is not simply profiting from nuclear energy. Burns is powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by a century of proximity to radioactive material that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. He requires external radiation input the way a healthy person requires food and water. Withhold it, and his system shuts down within the week. This explains something the show has depicted repeatedly but never properly explained. The scene in which Burns visits a doctor and is told he has every disease known to medical science. Every single illness, simultaneously present in his body, existing in a state of perfect equilibrium where each disease cancels out the others. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome, comparing it to three people simultaneously trying to get through a doorway. None of them can move forward because they are all blocking each other. Burns's diseases are all trying to kill him at the same time, and because they are all equally present, none of them can gain sufficient dominance to actually succeed. The doctor's conclusion is that Burns is the sickest man in America and simultaneously the most functionally indestructible because everything trying to kill him is blocked by everything else trying to kill him. The show plays this for laughs. It is one of the most quoted scenes in the series. But if you accept the radiation framework we established in Section 1, it stops being a joke and becomes something genuinely unsettling. Burns's body is not maintaining that disease equilibrium through any natural process. The weekly radiation treatments are doing it. The treatments do not cure his illnesses, they manage them. They hold every condition in perfect stasis, balanced precisely against every other condition, preventing any single disease from gaining dominance. It is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is a reactor, and his treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods to prevent a meltdown. And Smithers' patient, devoted, perpetually overlooked Smithers is not simply a loyal personal assistant. He is the only person who fully understands how Burns's medical protocol functions. He manages Burns's schedule. He ensures Burns makes every weekly appointment. He monitors Burns's physical condition with the kind of vigilance that has always seemed to go beyond professional loyalty. The show has established repeatedly that if Smithers ever left, Burns would be helpless in ways that go far beyond emotional dependency. Without Smithers managing the treatment schedule, Burns would miss a dose. The disease equilibrium would collapse. Every illness in his body would surge forward simultaneously. Smithers is not devoted to Burns out of affection alone. He is devoted because he knows with certainty that his absence is a death sentence. Smithers is keeping Burns alive through logistical precision, and he knows it. And that knowledge forms the invisible bedrock of their entire relationship. Burns's connection to historical events adds another layer to the immortality question. The show has depicted Burns interacting with, or casually referencing, an extraordinary range of historical moments. He served in the Second World War, though his role was, generously speaking, morally ambiguous. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the war and kept it for decades. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as historical knowledge, but as lived experience. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale, presumably during a period when Yale looked quite different from the institution it is today. He has described the construction of certain American institutions as events he personally witnessed. His family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution, and the Burns family itself extends back centuries. The show has depicted the Burns dynasty as one of the oldest continuously powerful lineages in American history. Not simply wealthy, but the kind of wealthy that builds infrastructure and then charges everyone else to use it. The kind of wealthy that shapes the physical and economic landscape of a region so thoroughly that the region cannot imagine existing without it. Burns inherited this legacy. He did not build it from scratch. He received an already ancient empire and has been extending it for over a century. The question the show never answers, but gestures toward in scattered episodes, is whether Burns is unique or whether his family has always found methods to extend their lifespans beyond what nature allows. If the current Burns has been alive for over a century through artificial medical intervention, what were his predecessors doing before nuclear radiation and modern pharmaceutical intervention were available? Before any of the technology that currently keeps Burns alive existed, did earlier Burns patriarchs use other methods to hold on to their wealth and their power across generations? The show does not say. But it does establish that the Burns family has been in continuous, uninterrupted control of their fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity does not happen through normal generational succession and luck. It requires extraordinary measures, sustained across centuries. And then there is Burns's relationship with death itself. Burns has come closer to dying than almost any other character on the show. Shot by Maggie, hospitalized dozens of times. Collapsed, fallen, abandoned in the wilderness, attacked, poisoned, and subjected to medical situations that would be fatal to a normal human being several times over. And every single time he returns. Not through the cartoon resilience that allows Homer to walk away from explosions. Burns comes back through infrastructure, through money, through the machinery of accumulated wealth that ensures, regardless of what happens to his physical form, someone will always be standing nearby with the resources and the knowledge to rebuild him. Homer survives because the show requires him to survive. Burns survives because he has spent over a century building a system specifically engineered to ensure his survival, regardless of physical circumstance. Homer's immortality is passive, incidental, a feature of the narrative. Burns's immortality is constructed. Every dollar he has spent, every institution he has compromised, every politician he has purchased, every physician he has retained, every research facility he has funded, it all serves a single purpose. Keep Burns alive, keep the treatment scheduled, keep the diseases balanced, keep the reactor running. Because if Burns dies, the empire dies with him. And empires do not allow themselves to die if they can help it. The most unsettling dimension of the Burns immortality theory is not the possibility that he might live forever. It is the realization that Springfield needs him to. The town's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the infrastructure that only Burns's wealth can provide. It is a closed loop, self-sustaining, where the man and the machine and the money feed each other in a cycle with no obvious exit. Springfield cannot remove Burns because Springfield cannot survive without him. Burns cannot die because dying would mean the system he built would finally have to face the consequences of what it has done to the people living inside it. Mr. Burns is the oldest man in Springfield. He might be the oldest man in the country. He is sustained by weekly radiation treatments that would be fatal to anyone else, protected by a fortune that predates the nation itself, maintained by an assistant whose devotion is functionally a medical necessity, and surrounded by a population that is too neurologically compromised to question why their employer glows in the dark and remembers events from before their grandparents were born. He is not immortal. He is something the English language does not have a precise word for. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying the bill, because Burns keeps the lights on. And if his treatment schedule holds, which Smithers will ensure it does, he will keep the lights on forever. Section 5. Maggie Simpson and the Power of Deliberate Silence. Your breathing is steady now. Let this one come to you gently. We have spent a lot of time on Homer in this story, on Burns, on the large, loud, overwhelming presences that define Springfield. But there is someone sitting very quietly at the center of this family, watching all of it unfold, and she has never said a word about what she sees. Maggie Simpson does not talk. She does not walk reliably. She communicates primarily through pacifier sounds and the occasional pointed look from beneath her ribbon. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. And in that time, without a single sentence, without a sustained conversation, without any of the tools that adults use to establish their competence and their presence, she has accomplished more than every other member of her family combined. She shot a billionaire. She led a daycare rebellion against a tyrannical caretaker and won. She saved her family from life-threatening situations on multiple occasions. She demonstrated problem-solving intelligence that would be remarkable in a fully grown adult. She was tested and found to possess cognitive abilities that standard assessments could not properly measure. And through all of it, through every remarkable thing she has ever done, she has said almost nothing. Let us start with the shooting, because it is the act most people associate with Maggie, though it is actually the least interesting thing about her. We have already examined the evidence in the previous section. We have walked through the alternate theories, but whatever actually happened in that parking lot, the aftermath matters. A baby was identified as the person who shot the wealthiest and most powerful man in Springfield. The police investigated. Evidence was examined. The official conclusion was that an infant committed an act of violence against a grown man, and the legal system had no mechanism for responding to this, because a baby cannot be prosecuted. But look at the final shot of that episode. Everyone has left the room. Maggie is alone. She looks around carefully, deliberately checking each corner of the room, confirming that no one is watching. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that precisely mimics the act of pulling a trigger. That is not reflexive behavior. That is not a baby randomly moving her mouth. That is a 1-year-old demonstrating situational awareness. Awareness that the action she either committed or witnessed had significance. Awareness that performing this gesture in front of others would have consequences. She waited until she was alone. She checked her surroundings, and then she reenacted the moment in private. That sequence requires memory, caution, and impulse control. It requires an understanding of context of which behaviors are appropriate to perform in public and which are better kept private. These are not traits we associate with infants. These are traits we associate with someone who understands the precise nature of their situation and has concluded that secrecy is the optimal strategy. The short film The Longest Daycare, released in 2012 and nominated for an Academy Award, provides the clearest, uninterrupted picture of what Maggie is actually capable of when nobody important is paying attention to her. The premise is simple. Maggie is dropped off at a daycare center run with the kind of cold institutional efficiency that suggests its administrator has never actually met a child. Inside the facility, Maggie encounters a caterpillar. She decides to protect it. Another baby, a bully named Gerald, familiar from many episodes, wants to destroy it. What follows is 7 minutes of Maggie outmaneuvering the bully, the staff, and the facility's entire physical security system to save the caterpillar and release it outside. She accomplishes this without speaking, without walking properly, without any of the capacities that adults rely on when solving problems. She does it through observation and planning and improvisation, through the kind of adaptive thinking that most adults would struggle to apply in a novel environment. She reads the environment she is in. She maps its threats. She develops strategies. She executes multi-step plans that require precise timing, spatial reasoning, and the ability to model other people's behavior well enough to predict how they will react. She does all of this while physically constrained to the motor skills of a 1-year-old. Her body constantly lags behind her mind. She falls. She stumbles. She has to crawl when she should be running. But her decision-making does not fail once. Every choice she makes is correct. Every action is optimized for the specific situation she is in. Her intelligence compensates for every physical limitation her body imposes, and she succeeds anyway. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly in various episodes. The results tend to be presented as quick jokes and then immediately dropped, but the pattern they create across the series is unmistakable. Maggie consistently demonstrates cognitive abilities that should not exist in a 1-year-old child. And the Simpson family consistently fails to register this because they are too preoccupied with Homer's chaos and Bart's pranks and Lisa's crusades to pay sustained attention to the baby who is quietly solving problems in the background. And that is the key. Quietly. Maggie's defining characteristic is not her intelligence. It is her silence. Her first word, Daddy, was voiced by Elizabeth Taylor as a kind of special cameo. It happened once and was never repeated. Maggie has gone 36 years without developing language in any meaningful way. She is surrounded by a family of profoundly verbal people. Homer never stops talking. Marge worries out loud continuously. Bart provokes constantly. Lisa lectures and argues and explains. The Simpson household is a wall of relentless noise. And in the middle of all of it, Maggie sits in silence, watching, listening, processing. The theory, and it is a theory supported by everything the show has shown us about how Maggie operates, is that her silence is not developmental delay. It is a conscious, strategic decision made by a mind intelligent enough to recognize the value of not being noticed. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in this family. Lisa is brilliant. Lisa has an IQ that dwarfs everyone else in the house, and most of the adults in Springfield. And what has that intelligence gotten her? Isolation, mockery, dismissal. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets punished. Lisa tries to improve the world around her and gets worn down by the weight of a community that has no interest in being improved. Lisa's intelligence is her greatest gift and her greatest burden because she uses it visibly. She announces herself as the smartest person in the room, and the room responds by making sure she knows exactly how little that matters. Maggie watched this happen. She has been watching it happen since the day she was born. She watched her sister fight every day for recognition and receive nothing but resistance. She watched the family's most capable thinker get consistently undervalued by a household and a community that rewards compliance and punishes insight. And Maggie drew the opposite conclusion from the one Lisa keeps reaching. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more you can actually accomplish. Think about how this plays out across the show. Every time Maggie does something remarkable, what happens? The family does not notice. The community does not notice. Burns was shot, and the investigation focused on every adult in Springfield before anyone seriously considered the baby. The daycare rebellion succeeded precisely because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every heroic act Maggie has ever performed, every display of intelligence, every moment where she saves the day, it happens below the radar, in the margins, in the spaces where nobody is paying close attention. And Maggie has ensured that nobody pays attention to her by maintaining the most effective possible disguise. She pretends to be exactly what everyone expects a baby to be: quiet, passive, dependent, helpless. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. She is the most capable member of the Simpson family, and she has spent 36 years making sure nobody figures that out. Connect this to the radiation theory from the first section. If Springfield's contaminated environment creates mutations that affect each resident differently, then Maggie represents the far opposite end of the spectrum from Homer. Homer's mutation diminished his intelligence to the point of clinical disability. Maggie's mutation appears to have amplified hers to levels that cannot be properly measured. Same environmental exposure, same family, same contaminated water and irradiated air. But where the father's brain was reduced, the youngest daughter's was supercharged. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same radioactive reality. He is what happens when mutation takes something away from a person. She is what happens when mutation gives something extraordinary. And the show has placed them in the same family, the same house, breathing the same air every single day for 36 years. If the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on a different kind of emotional weight. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode is the product of an unconscious mind trying to hold on to his family, then Maggie's extraordinary capabilities are Homer's deepest hope for his youngest child projected onto the dream. He cannot watch her grow up. He cannot see her develop into the person she becomes. He cannot know what kind of life she is going to have. So in the dream, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her age. He makes her capable of things no actual infant could accomplish. Because in his coma, Homer needs to believe that Maggie will be all right even without him there to protect her. Her genius is a father's prayer, translated into dream logic. But in the waking version of Springfield, if there is a waking version, the darker reading is more compelling. Maggie does not speak because she has observed, with the clarity of someone who is paying attention in a household where no one else is, that speaking gets you nothing in this particular environment. She does not reveal her intelligence because intelligence is punished in Springfield. She watches everything. She remembers everything. She understands the architecture of her family and her town in a way that no other character in the show does, and she waits. What she is waiting for, the show has never told us. Maggie's endgame remains the last truly unresolved mystery in the Simpson family. She is the only character whose future is entirely unknown, because the show has never definitively revealed the upper limit of what she is capable of. But we have seen glimpses. We have seen her shoot a man. We have seen her command a room full of babies. We have seen her solve problems that stump the adults around her. We have seen her provide crucial information to her family in moments of crisis, and we have seen the family trust that information implicitly, even as they fail to fully reckon with what it says about who she is. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She cannot walk without falling. She cannot speak in full sentences, and she is the most quietly powerful presence on Evergreen Terrace, in a family that has no idea what is living in their nursery. She has not decided what to do with that power yet, Or perhaps she has, and she is simply waiting for the right moment. Behind that pacifier, behind those enormous dark eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate and unbroken silence, something is watching, something is thinking, something is keeping a long, patient account of everything it has seen. And when Maggie finally acts, when she finally breaks her silence and reveals what she has been carrying behind that blank baby expression, Springfield will not see it coming, because that is exactly how she designed it. Section 6. Mona Simpson and the Burns conspiracy that broke 3 generations. You are getting comfortable now. Really comfortable. Let this next story settle over you like something warm. We have talked a great deal about what Burns has done to the town of Springfield, to its water, to its air, to the biology of its residents, and the cognitive function of its workers. But we have not yet talked about what Burns did to one specific family, one woman, one act of retaliation that sent its consequences echoing forward across 30 years and 3 generations. We have not yet talked about Homer's mother. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official account. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, told him she had passed away when Homer was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother had died, and whose father was too closed off and emotionally limited to fill the void she left behind. This shaped Homer profoundly. His desperate hunger for approval, his terror of abandonment, his willingness to absorb humiliation and degradation from his employer rather than risk losing the stability of his job. His clinginess toward Marge, his compulsive need to be liked by the people around him, his inability to hold firm in any confrontation because any confrontation might result in someone leaving. Homer Simpson's entire emotional architecture is a coping mechanism for a loss he experienced when he was too young to understand it. And in Season 7, the show revealed that the loss was a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired in November of 1995, and it is consistently cited as one of the finest episodes the show has ever produced. The plot begins with Homer faking his own death to avoid working on a Saturday Classic Homer, which leads him to the Hall of Records to correct the error, which leads him to a discovery that changes everything. According to municipal records, his mother is alive. She was never dead. The grave Abe showed him belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been pointing at a famous writer's headstone and calling it his wife's burial site for Homer's entire life. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave, grieving for him. They have a reunion that is one of the most genuinely moving scenes the show has ever staged. A grown man and the mother who vanished from his life when he was a child, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. And then she tells him the truth. She did not die. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she had to, because staying would have put Homer and Abe in immediate danger. Because the man who owned the power plant, the same man Homer would grow up to work for, without ever understanding the connection, had destroyed her life and forced her underground. The story begins in 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer, who was small and cheerful and completely unaware of the political upheaval happening in the world outside their comfortable Springfield life. The civil rights movement was transforming the country. The counterculture was at its peak. The protests against Vietnam were filling the streets, and Mona was radicalized. She joined a group of activists. The show depicts them with characteristic affection and gentle absurdity, but it also makes clear that their cause was real. They had identified something happening in Springfield that the rest of the town had either not noticed or had decided to look away from. Mr. Burns, in addition to owning the nuclear power plant, owned a biological weapons laboratory. Let that settle for a moment. Burns was not only operating a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations, he was also manufacturing weaponized biological agents in a laboratory located in the same community where Homer was growing up, where children played, where families went about their daily lives with no knowledge of what was being produced a few miles away. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory. They destroyed the biological agent stored inside using what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be a younger version of the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid was successful. The germs were gone. But Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped. Someone had been knocked down in the chaos of the raid. She turned back to help them, and the person she stopped to help was Mr. Burns. She helped the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, and Burns saw her face. He recognized her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a federal fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not hold her son or explain to him why she was leaving. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping. He was a child. He did not know what the kiss meant. He did not know it was a goodbye. She walked out the door that night and disappeared into a life underground, and Homer woke up the next morning and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead, and Homer spent the next 30 years of his life living with the weight of that. Now here is where the story becomes something darker than a family drama. Burns did not simply report Mona to the FBI and move on. He pursued her, actively with resources, for decades. He held a personal grudge against a woman who had destroyed his weapons laboratory, and he used every available means to ensure she could never return to her family. When Mona finally comes back to Springfield in Season 7, Burns recognizes her almost immediately. He sees her through a car window and calls the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time, but this time he is an adult. And this time he understands exactly why she is leaving. He knows who forced her out. He knows that the man responsible is the man who signs his paycheck. Homer works for Burns. He has worked for Burns his entire adult life. He earns his living from the man who destroyed his family, and he cannot make the connection. He does not confront Burns. He does not walk out. He does not even seem to fully process what it means that his employer and his mother's persecutor are the same person. And this, the theory argues, is not an accident. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life, he engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was a child, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up emotionally damaged, desperate for approval, incapable of challenging authority, terrified of abandonment. The precise psychological profile of the ideal employee. A man who would work in dangerous conditions for decades without complaint, because the alternative, being alone, being unloved, being abandoned again, was worse than any job could be. Homer does not work at the power plant because he is too unintelligent to find something better. Homer works at the power plant because Burns broke him when he was 6 years old. And the broken version of Homer is exactly what Burns needs in Sector 7G compliant. Grateful for any scrap of attention, incapable of organizing resistance. The show confirms the deliberateness of this arrangement in a later season, when it is revealed that Burns and Grandpa Simpson struck a deal. Burns had committed a crime. Abe discovered it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer's employment at the plant in perpetuity, no matter how many mistakes Homer made, no matter how many times he should have been dismissed. No matter how completely incompetent he became, 742 documented errors, and he was never permanently let go because a secret agreement between his father and his mother's persecutor protected him. Homer's job security was not a cartoon convenience. It was a contractual obligation brokered in silence, maintained across decades, and never explained to Homer, because explaining it would require explaining everything else. His mother was a radical who fought against a billionaire's bioweapons program. The billionaire retaliated by destroying her family and forcing her into exile. Her husband covered up the truth and made a deal with the man responsible. Her son grew up believing he was the kind of child a mother would rather disappear than raise, became cognitively impaired through a combination of environmental exposure and physical brain damage, and spent his entire adult life working for the man who took his childhood from him. 3 generations of one family, shaped and broken by one man's grudge. Burns did not simply take Homer's mother. He took Homer's potential. The episode where the crayon is removed proves that a different version of Homer exists. An articulate, perceptive, self-aware Homer who can understand the world around him and his place within it. That Homer is brilliant. That Homer is capable. That Homer is what the Simpson family could have had if Burns had not intervened when Homer was a small child and his mother vanished in the night. Mona Simpson died in a later season. Her death scene is quiet and unhurried and genuinely sad. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew slip away, and the show does not reach for a joke. There is no cutaway, no reset, just a man and his mother, and the full weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them in a hospital room that is not large enough to hold all of what they never got to say to each other. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the jokes, underneath 36 seasons of Homer falling down and getting back up, there is a story about a family that was systematically dismantled by one man's power and one town's inability or unwillingness to resist it. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the devil and buried the truth beneath a dead poet's headstone. Homer inherited the consequences and spent his whole life not understanding why his life felt so heavy, why the simplest things always seemed so much harder for him than for other people, why no matter how much he tried, something always seemed slightly broken in a way he could not quite identify. Burns won. Burns always wins in Springfield. Because in a town like this, the man with the money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson works at the power plant until the day he dies because his grandfather made a deal and his mother made a choice, and the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G. And Homer was broken before he ever clocked in for his first shift. Section 7. The predictions how a cartoon keeps getting the future right. You are very relaxed now. Let the words just wash over you. You do not need to hold on to all of this. Just let it drift. In the last few years, a strange thing has happened to The Simpsons' reputation. The show, which was once primarily discussed in terms of its golden age and its later decline, has become famous in the 2020s for something nobody anticipated. It keeps predicting the future. Or rather, and this is the more interesting and ultimately more truthful version of the phenomenon it appears to. In the year 2000, an episode called Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson has become the President of the United States. Her immediate predecessor in the Oval Office is identified, casually, as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 election. Screenshots from the episode went viral. The Simpsons predicted Trump became a meme that entered mainstream conversation, reaching people who had not watched the show in 20 years. For a brief, strange cultural moment, a cartoon that had been airing since 1989 became the subject of serious public conversation about precognition, and that was just the most prominent example. In 1995, the show depicted a device strapped to someone's wrist that functioned as a communication and computing tool, something very close to a modern smartwatch, more than 15 years before smartwatches became consumer products. In 1994, Homer goes to space with Buzz Aldrin, in an episode that reads very differently now that commercial and celebrity space tourism has become a genuine industry. In 1998, Homer writes an equation on a chalkboard that appears to predict the mass of the Higgs boson particle, a prediction that physicists at the time could not have confirmed, and that was not experimentally verified until 2012. In 1999, Homer proposes a theory that the universe is shaped like a donut, which he calls the donut-shaped universe theory, and which cosmologists have since found some observational support for in the microwave background radiation patterns. In a 1993 episode called Marge in Chains, a flu virus originating in Asia spreads to Springfield, causing mass panic, supply shortages, and a frantic scramble for a cure. The episode aired 27 years before the COVID-19 pandemic. During that same fictional outbreak, a swarm of killer bees is accidentally released, which felt prophetically strange when Asian giant hornets, which the media immediately branded murder hornets, appeared in the United States during the actual 2020 pandemic. In 1996, an episode featured a joke about the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. 28 years between the joke and the reality. In 1998, the show depicted a media company acquiring what is clearly meant to be Fox, within the framework of a larger consolidating entertainment corporation. In 2019, Disney acquired 20th Century Fox, which meant Disney had technically acquired The Simpsons, a show that had made jokes about exactly this kind of corporate consolidation 20 years earlier. Every time one of these moments surfaces, the internet responds the same way. How did they know? The screenshots circulate, the side-by-side comparisons get made. The word prophecy appears in comment sections and social media posts. And a show that has been running since before the internet existed becomes, briefly and repeatedly, the subject of genuine amazement. The people who actually made the show have a much less exciting explanation, and they are almost certainly right. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer on The Simpsons for most of its run, has addressed the prediction phenomenon with characteristic directness. His explanation is that if you throw enough darts, you are going to hit some bullseyes. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes across 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, observations, and satirical commentaries on American culture, technology, politics, and society. When you generate that volume of content over that length of time, some of it is going to align with future events through sheer mathematical probability. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its most celebrated seasons, put it even more directly. There are very few cases where The Simpsons actually predicted something. Most of it is coincidence, because the episodes are old enough that history has had time to cycle back around to the situations they were describing. Fact-checking organizations have systematically examined the most famous examples and found that most of them have straightforward explanations. The Trump episode did not predict Trump becoming president. The writers observed that Trump had been publicly flirting with a presidential run since the late 1980s and wrote a joke about the logical extreme of celebrity culture entering politics. The Disney-Fox merger was not predicted. It was a satirical exaggeration of media consolidation trends that were already clearly in motion. The smartwatch was not predicted. It was an extrapolation of what wristwatch technology might eventually become. The Simpsons writing room has historically been among the most academically credentialed in television. Multiple writers hold degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other elite institutions. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, science, computer science, and political theory. These are not people making random guesses. They are highly educated, exceptionally well-read observers of American culture, spending their careers studying patterns, analyzing trends, and then following those trends to their absurd but logical conclusions. They are not predicting the future. They are reading the present more carefully than most people do, and then pushing it forward a few steps. And yet, while the debunking explains most of the famous examples, some of the coincidences are specific enough that they sit uncomfortably even after the explanation. The Trump episode did not simply suggest a celebrity might become president. It named Trump specifically and depicted him descending an escalator which mirrors the actual escalator entrance he made when announcing his 2016 campaign. A specific visual detail in an episode from the year 2000 that matched a specific visual detail from a real event 16 years later. The Siegfried and Roy episode did not simply joke that exotic animal performers were putting themselves in danger. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers, which is almost precisely what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers. Not a lion, not a bear, not a vague exotic animal, a white tiger. These are not vague trend extrapolations. These are specific details that align with specific future events in ways that make the statistical probability explanation feel just slightly inadequate. Here is the more interesting theory, and the one that is harder to dismiss once you have thought about it. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future, not through magic or prophecy, but through cultural influence. The Simpsons is one of the most widely watched, most deeply embedded pieces of American media in the history of the medium. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations have entered the American cultural lexicon in ways that no other show has managed. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream of an enormous audience. Millions of people absorb it. It becomes a reference point. It becomes the kind of thing people think about when they see Trump on the news. The joke does not predict the future. The joke makes the future feel familiar when it arrives. It primes the cultural imagination. It makes certain outcomes feel less like shocking developments and more like inevitable punchlines. When Trump actually won in 2016, the cultural response was not purely shock. It was, for a significant portion of the population, recognition. The Simpsons already did this. We have seen this before. The show had prepared the culture for the possibility, and when the possibility became reality, it felt like something that had always been coming, because a cartoon had suggested it 16 years earlier. The Simpsons did not predict Disney buying Fox. The Simpsons made media consolidation feel inevitable by depicting it as obvious satire. And when the merger actually happened, the cultural response was similarly recognition-based. Of course they did. The Simpsons already told us this was where things were going. The show's satire does not forecast events. It normalizes the conditions that make those events possible. It takes trends that are already in motion and presents them as accomplished facts years before they are. And when those facts materialize, the audience experiences something that feels like prophecy but is actually the result of having been culturally prepared for the outcome in advance. Springfield does not reflect America. America has been slowly becoming Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and we stared into it long enough that we started to resemble what we saw. The nuclear power plant on the hill, the corrupt billionaire who cannot remember his employees' names, the government that oscillates between incompetence and capture, the population too distracted and too cognitively drained to notice how thoroughly it is being exploited. Springfield was not a prediction of where America was heading. It was a diagnosis of where America already was. The show just wrote it down before most people had put it into words. And there is one final piece to the prediction phenomenon that is worth sitting with. For every prediction that came true, there are thousands that did not. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies. Predictions about political outcomes that went a different direction. Cultural shifts that never arrived. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody shares them on social media. Nobody builds a theory around the predictions that failed. Confirmation bias only works in one direction. We remember the hits and forget the misses. And when you produce 800 episodes containing thousands of observations about American culture, and then filter those observations through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever created, which is the internet, you end up with a highlight reel that looks exactly like prophecy. The predictions are not supernatural. They are the natural result of an exceptionally well-written show running for an exceptionally long time, staffed by highly educated observers of American life, producing more satirical content than any other show in television history, and then having that content filtered through collective memory until only the accurate observations remain visible. The Simpsons did not predict the future. The Simpsons wrote enough possible futures that some of them were mathematically guaranteed to come true. And the ones that came true are the only ones anyone remembers. But try telling that to yourself the next time a clip from 1,997 lines up perfectly with a headline from this year. Because even knowing exactly how the trick works, it is still genuinely impressive to watch. Section 8. The Principal and the Pauper Springfield's Contract with Untruth. You are drifting a little now. That is exactly right. Let the story continue underneath you like a river. There is an episode of The Simpsons that fans have been debating, arguing about, and largely condemning for nearly 30 years. An episode that is consistently ranked among the worst in the series. An episode that critics argued destroyed a character by revealing that everything we knew about him was built on a lie. But I want to suggest a different reading. I want to suggest that this episode is not the worst thing The Simpsons ever did. It is the most honest thing The Simpsons ever did. And the reason fans hated it so much is precisely because it was too honest. It said something the show had been doing quietly for years, and it said it out loud, in plain daylight without flinching. Season 9, Episode 2, The Principal and the Pauper. The 28th of September, 1997. The episode begins with Springfield Elementary honoring Principal Seymour Skinner for 20 years of service to the school. And then a stranger walks in, a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam veteran, believed dead after being captured as a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia. He survived. He escaped. He made his way home, and he discovered that someone else had been living his life for the past 20 years. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is revealed to be an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before the war, Tamzarian was a petty criminal, a street kid with no prospects, drafted into the army and placed in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother, Agnes. Agnes assumed he was her son because she needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or a home or an identity worth claiming, went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the life, the mother. He lived inside a stolen identity for 2 decades. And it worked, because nobody in Springfield ever had reason to look too carefully until the real Skinner came home. The truth is now fully exposed. Everyone in Springfield knows their principal is not who he says he is, and the town meets to decide what to do about it. They do not decide whether to prosecute Tamzarian. They do not decide how to restore the real Skinner's identity to him. They vote on something more fundamental. They vote on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. And the vote is unanimous. They vote to maintain the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree that Tamzarian is the real Skinner, the actual Seymour Skinner, the war hero, the prisoner of war, the man whose identity was stolen, is physically tied to a railroad car and expelled from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal, under penalty of punishment, to ever mention the real name Tamzarian or the events of this episode again. Think about what that means. A town looked at definitive proof that their principal had been living a stolen identity for 2 decades, with the actual person whose identity was stolen standing directly in front of them, and collectively chose the fake version over the true one. They sentenced the truth to exile. They made it a crime to speak the truth's name. Fans despised this episode. The backlash was fierce and has never fully subsided. The complaint was that it destroyed Skinner's character, that it made a mockery of continuity, that it was the show's writers being lazy and contemptuous of the audience. But here is what nobody wanted to hear. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. It is the only episode to show you the mechanism clearly, in real time, without any ambiguity. The rest of the show allows Springfield to forget things between episodes without ever showing you how the forgetting happens. Events occur, catastrophes unfold. And by the following week, everyone has moved on as if nothing significant occurred. This episode shows you the machinery, the vote, the legal decree, the physical removal of the inconvenient truth from the community. It shows you that Springfield's collective amnesia is not a passive phenomenon. It is an active choice, made deliberately, through a kind of civic consensus that prioritizes comfort over reality. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. The only difference in this episode is that the show let you watch it happen in real time rather than off-screen. Consider the history. The town has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. It has been sealed under a dome by the federal government. It has survived nuclear near misses, environmental catastrophes, and the literal blocking of the sun. And by the following episode, every single time, everything is back to normal. Nobody references the previous disaster. Nobody is still dealing with the consequences. The slate is clean. The industry term for this is episodic storytelling. It is standard practice for long-running shows. But the principal and the pauper offers a fourth explanation that sits alongside the coma theory and the radiation theory. Springfield resets because the town collectively chooses to reset. Deliberately. Through an unspoken social contract that says, we will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the fiction as fact and the fact as criminal, and anyone who insists on the truth will be removed. That is not a cartoon convention. That is a description of how real communities handle information that threatens their stability. Small towns in particular develop a remarkable capacity for collective denial. Scandals disappear, crimes are forgotten, uncomfortable truths are rewritten until the official version is the only version anyone can remember. The principal and the pauper did not break the Simpsons. It diagnosed Springfield. It showed you that the town's amnesia is a feature, not a bug. It is a defense mechanism employed by a population that cannot afford to confront the reality of their situation, because confronting it would mean admitting that their principal is a fraud, their water is contaminated, their billionaire employer has been alive for over a century, and their children have been yellow since birth, and nobody thought to ask why. Springfield does not forget because its residents are stupid. They forget because remembering is dangerous. If they remembered the dome, they would have to acknowledge the pollution. If they acknowledged the pollution, they would have to confront the power plant. If they confronted the power plant, they would have to challenge Burns. If they challenged Burns, the economy collapses, the town dies, and everyone loses the one thing they all depend on. So they forget. They vote to forget. They make it illegal to remember. And anyone who insists on the truth, anyone who shows up with real evidence that the official narrative is a lie, gets tied to a train and sent away. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in a coal mine. He arrived with proof. He was a man made of evidence, a living document of the town's willingness to let a lie run for 20 years. And the town's response was not gratitude. It was removal. They sent the truth away and passed a law against mentioning it. If the coma theory is true, this episode takes on an additional dimension of sadness. Homer's unconscious mind, drifting through the fog of a long coma, invented a scenario in which an entire town votes to sustain a comforting lie because that is what Homer needs to believe. He needs to believe that a stolen identity can become real through collective agreement. He needs to believe that the fiction can replace the reality and nobody has to call it out. Because his coma is exactly that. A fake life pretending to be a real one. A dream masquerading as wakefulness. And as long as nobody questions it, as long as the dream town of Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. And the real Seymour Skinner is still somewhere out there, sent away from his own life, the last honest man in a town that voted honesty into exile. The Principal and the Pauper is not the worst episode of The Simpsons. It is the most important one, because it is the only episode that shows you the machinery underneath Springfield's impossible reality, the social infrastructure that makes every reset possible. The collective choice that allows a town full of people with 4 fingers and yellow skin to look each other in the eye every morning and agree, without saying a word about it, that everything is perfectly normal. Section 9. Where is Springfield? The geography of a town that refuses to be found. The room is very still now. Your breath is slow and even. Let this section carry you the rest of the way. We are going to talk about a question that has no answer. A question the show has been teasing for 36 years with the specific, deliberate intention of never resolving it. Not because the creators forgot to decide, but because the unresolvable nature of the question is itself the point. Where is Springfield? Not as a philosophical question, as a practical one. Which state is Springfield in? The show has been contradicting itself about this for its entire run. Springfield borders Ohio in one episode and Nevada in another. It has a harbor and an ocean shoreline in some episodes and is described as landlocked in others. It has mountains nearby and deserts nearby and a gorge and forests and a tire fire that has been burning for years, all within a distance that the characters can reach by car in an afternoon. In terms of climate, Springfield has experienced blizzards and tropical heat waves and everything in between, sometimes within the same season. Its geography shifts between episodes with the casual indifference of a dream, which, if the coma theory is true, is precisely what it is. The state abbreviation has been shown as NT, which corresponds to no actual American state. Lisa's area code, in episodes where it has been referenced, points toward Missouri. When Homer calls the state capital, the operator identifies the state as one beginning with a vowel, which narrows the field meaningfully without committing to an answer. The show has dropped dozens of clues across hundreds of episodes, and every time one of them seems to narrow the possibilities, another clue in a different episode opens them back up. Matt Groening, the show's creator, named the town after Springfield, Oregon, and admitted as much in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He grew up near Springfield, Oregon. He chose the name because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, precisely because it would be familiar to viewers in nearly every part of the country. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery was settled. Springfield was in Oregon. And then the show continued contradicting this, because the writers were under no obligation to honor Groening's admission. Episodes aired after the interview that placed Springfield in geographic contexts incompatible with Oregon. The writers kept the mystery alive, because the mystery had always been more useful to the show than any definitive answer. On the surface, the explanation is simple and genuinely intentional. Springfield is meant to be universal. It is every American town and no specific American town. It is designed to feel familiar to every viewer, regardless of where they actually live, to give every audience member the sense that this could be their hometown, that these could be their neighbors, That this absurd and dysfunctional community is recognizable because it resembles something they already know? Groening has confirmed this. The writers have confirmed it. The show's geographic evasiveness is a deliberate design decision meant to serve the broadest possible audience. But under the framework of the theories we have been exploring, Springfield's geographic impossibility takes on a more interesting dimension. If the radiation theory is true, if Springfield is a contamination zone where the laws of biology have been visibly altered by decades of nuclear exposure, why should geography be exempt? The people inside Springfield break the rules of human anatomy. The animals break the rules of natural biology. If the contamination has warped the biological fabric of the town, why should the physical landscape remain normal? Maybe Springfield has mountains and oceans and deserts in close proximity because the contamination does not only affect living organisms. Maybe whatever the power plant has been leaking into the environment has altered the physical space around Springfield in ways that compress geography, that fold distant landscapes into impossible proximity, that make the laws of topography as flexible as the laws of biology. If the coma theory is true, the explanation is simpler and more emotionally resonant. Homer's dreaming brain does not have a precise internal map of America. It has impressions, emotional memories, fragments of every place Homer has ever been or seen on a screen. Mountains remembered from a family vacation, the ocean from a postcard, desert heat from a long drive somewhere. The particular quality of light over the Midwest on a summer afternoon, Homer's unconscious mind assembled Springfield from all of those fragments, layered without regard for geographic logic, because dreaming minds do not navigate by atlas, they navigate by feeling. The town feels like America because it is made from every piece of America that Homer ever encountered, reassembled in the way that made emotional sense rather than physical sense. If the principle and the pauper theory Springfield as a community of collective denial is true, the town's geographic evasiveness is something more practical. You cannot investigate a town you cannot locate. You cannot bring regulatory action against a nuclear facility if the state it operates in changes depending on which episode you watched. You cannot hold anyone accountable for environmental contamination if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means regulatory authority. Landing means a state attorney general with jurisdiction. Landing means an EPA office with a fixed address that can be responsible for inspecting those cracked cooling towers. A town without a fixed location has no fixed legal accountability. Burns's plant has been leaking radioactive material for decades, and no single regulatory body has ever been able to mount a sustained investigation because the town it operates in does not consistently belong to any one state's oversight authority. The geographic impossibility of Springfield is not just a comedy device. It is a legal and regulatory shield, and it has been protecting the power plant for 36 years. In the episode Behind the Laughter, the show's 12th season mockumentary, Springfield's location is finally given, sort of. In the original broadcast, the family is identified as being from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns of the same episode, the location was changed to a different state entirely. The answer literally depends on which version of the episode you are watching. The show gave you the truth, and then revised the truth based on the distribution format. Even when Springfield has a definitive location, that location is not actually definitive. It shifts. It refuses to stay fixed, just like everything else in this town. Every state in America has been proposed as Springfield's home at some point. Every theory has evidence supporting it and evidence disproving it. And that state of permanent ambiguity has been deliberately maintained by the show for longer than most of its viewers have been alive. Springfield will never be located. Not because the show cannot decide, but because the show decided long ago that an unlocalizable town is more useful, more interesting, and more protected than a town with a zip code. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. And a town that belongs to everyone is a town that nobody can quite shut down. Section 10. The floating timeline why nobody ages and why we won't let them. You are almost there. This is the last one. Let it bring everything together. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted on the 17th of December, 1989. He is 10 years old right now, as you listen to this, wherever and whenever you are. Lisa was 8 then and is 8 now. Maggie was one then and is one now. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s when the show began, and they remain, quite precisely, in their mid-30s today. 36 years have passed in the real world. 0 years have passed in Springfield. The industry term for this phenomenon is a floating timeline. The show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the Simpson family lives in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were living in 1995. The year changes. The technology changes, the cultural references update, but the ages do not. The characters exist in a state of permanent temporal suspension, frozen at the ages they were when the show began, while everything around them evolves. Most people accept this without thinking too hard about it. It is simply how long-running animated shows work. You tune in because you want to see these specific characters, and the specific characters you want to see are the ones you remember from the first time you watched, so the show keeps them the same age forever. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has created contradictions too large to easily ignore. The most obvious problem involves Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their history was set in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school during a period of specific cultural character, particular music, particular fashion, particular anxieties specific to that era. Homer's awkward courtship of Marge took place against the backdrop of a country in a particular moment. But if the floating timeline keeps Homer and Marge in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not meet in 1979. They met around 2005. Their high school experience was not defined by disco and post-Vietnam ennui. It was defined by MySpace, and early YouTube, and the early years of the smartphone era. The show has acknowledged this explicitly. In later seasons, flashback episodes have gradually updated the era of Homer and Marge's youth, moving it forward decade by decade as the floating timeline demands. They were briefly depicted as products of the hippie era, then grunge. Then they became something closer to early millennials. Their origin story has been retold at least 4 times, each version set in a different decade, each version internally consistent but collectively incompatible with the others. Homer and Marge do not have a fixed history. They have a history that gets rewritten every few years to maintain the illusion of a permanent present. Their memories are unstable. Their origin story is a draft document, revised whenever the current timeline requires a new version. Now bring all of our theories together. Every single theory we have explored tonight converges on this point. Every one of them arrives at the same conclusion through a different path. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man. Homer's brain cannot make his children grow up because he was not there to witness it. The radiation theory says nobody ages because their biology has been mutated by chronic nuclear contamination, altering their cellular processes in ways that prevent normal aging. The collective denial theory from the principal and the pauper says nobody ages because Springfield collectively agrees to ignore any truth that threatens the status quo, including the truth of time passing. The Burns immortality theory says at least one person in Springfield has found a way to circumvent death through technology and wealth, which means the concept of normal human aging is already negotiable within this universe. And the prediction theory says The Simpsons exists in a feedback loop with American culture, where the show and reality mirror each other so closely that the distinction between fiction and fact has become genuinely porous. All of these theories, approached from completely different directions using completely different evidence, say the same thing. Time does not work in Springfield. Something has broken the normal flow of time for everyone who lives there. The floating timeline is not a production convenience, it is a symptom. It is the show telling you, through structure rather than dialogue, that these characters are trapped. They are locked in a loop, cycling endlessly through variations of the same lives without ever progressing, without ever growing, without ever reaching the conclusion that time should eventually deliver to every living thing. The show knows it can imagine its characters aging. It has done so, deliberately and beautifully. In the season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, the show flashes forward to show a 23-year-old Lisa engaged to be married. The future it depicts is specific and emotionally rich. Lisa has become the person the show has always suggested she would become. Brilliant, principled, lonely in the particular way that very intelligent and morally serious people are often lonely, searching for genuine connection in a world that mostly does not understand her. The episode proves that the show can envision its characters' futures. It can imagine who they would become if time were permitted to pass, but it refuses to let that happen in the main timeline. The flash forward is one episode, a what if, a glimpse through a window that immediately closes. Lisa returns to being 8. Bart returns to being 10. The future is locked away. The permanent present resumes. The show can imagine growth. It chooses not to allow it. This is where the mystery of the floating timeline expands beyond The Simpsons itself and becomes a statement about something larger. Because the Simpson family is not simply a family in a show. The Simpson family is the American family. They have been the American family for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. Longer than any other sitcom family. Longer than any other animated family. Longer than almost any other family in the history of television, period. And the American family, as the show depicts it, cannot be permitted to change. Homer must always be middle-aged and baffled and somehow still employed. Marge must always be patient and slightly suppressed and holding the household together through the sheer force of her persistence. Bart must always be rebellious and fundamentally good-hearted beneath the chaos. Lisa must always be brilliant and idealistic and slightly apart from the world around her. Maggie must always be silent, watching, waiting. The dynamic must be preserved. The structure must hold. Because the moment the Simpson family is genuinely allowed to age, the moment Bart goes to college and Lisa moves away to a city that can appreciate her, and Maggie finally speaks in full sentences, and Homer retires and Marge is left, in that house on Evergreen Terrace with photographs of children who grew up while she was not looking, the show becomes something else entirely. It becomes an elegy. It becomes the story of a family that ran out of time. And America, on some level, does not want that story. America wants the version where the kids are always young, where the parents are always together, where the house always looks the same, where the couch gag always plays and nobody ever has to say goodbye. The floating timeline is the show's deepest thesis statement, hidden in plain sight. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we need them to be. Not because of radiation or coma dreams or collective denial or Burns's medical technology, though all of those theories are doing real work. Ultimately, they are frozen because of us. Because we are the ones who turn the show on. We are the ones who keep coming back. We are the audience that has sustained 36 seasons of the same family in the same house in the same town, and we have done it because something about the permanence of that image gives us something we cannot easily find elsewhere. The show can imagine its characters growing up, moving out, changing, becoming. It has imagined it. It knows how to do it. And it chooses not to, because the moment it does, the spell breaks. Once Bart turns 11, the show ends. Once Lisa moves away, the house on Evergreen Terrace becomes just a house. Once Maggie says her second word and her third and begins to be the extraordinary person she clearly already is, she is no longer the mystery at the heart of the family. She is just a person, like everyone else. And we are not ready for that. The Simpsons are trapped in a loop. But the honest truth, the one that the show has been building toward for 36 years without ever quite saying directly, is that we are the ones who built the loop. We pressed pause in 1989. We have been pressing it ever since. We tune in every week to make sure the walls are still standing, the family is still intact, the timeline is still floating. And every time we watch, every time we laugh at a joke we have heard before, every time we sit down with a bowl of cereal on a Sunday evening and let Springfield wash over us, the way it has for most of our lives, we tighten the loop a little more. We make it a little harder for those characters to escape. Because if they escape, the show ends. And the show ending means admitting that the version of America it has always represented the chaotic, resilient, dysfunctional, loving, eternally hopeful version of the middle-class American family was always temporary, was always fragile, was always one birthday away from dissolving into something we do not recognize anymore. Section 11. Hans Moleman and the Mystery of Springfield's Most Unlucky Resident. Still with me? Good. Your breathing is very slow now. This one is quieter. There is a character in The Simpsons who most people know, without quite being able to name. A tiny, elderly, nearly blind man who shuffles through Springfield streets in an oversized coat and thick glasses, appearing in the background of scenes and existing primarily, in narrative terms, to suffer. His name is Hans Moleman, and he has been killed more times than any other character in the history of American animation. Not in Treehouse of Horror episodes. Not in dream sequences. In regular canonical episodes of The Simpsons, Hans Moleman has been hit by cars, crushed by falling objects, buried alive, struck by lightning, incinerated, eaten by animals, and dropped into various environmental hazards too numerous to catalog with any confidence. He dies. And then he appears in the next episode, completely fine. No resurrection, no explanation, no acknowledgement from any other character that the man who is currently standing in the background was dead 2 episodes ago. He just shows up again, ready for the next one. Most viewers accept this as a running joke. Moleman dies a lot. It is funny. The repetition is the punchline. Do not think about it. But there is a detail buried in one episode that transforms the Moleman gag into something genuinely puzzling. In an episode where his age is referenced, Moleman states that he is 31 years old. 31. Look at him. Moleman appears to be in his 80s, or perhaps his 90s, the kind of deeply age that suggests a life of significant hardship. If he is telling the truth about his age and there is no narrative reason within the show to suggest he is lying, then something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man who should be in the prime of his life and accelerated his biological age by 50 or 60 years. Under the radiation theory, this is one of the most compelling data points available. If Springfield's contaminated environment creates different kinds of mutations in different residents, and if those mutations can go in both directions, reducing Homer's intelligence, amplifying Maggie's, giving Burns a disease equilibrium that prevents death, then what happens to someone whose mutation takes the form of accelerated aging? You get a 31-year-old man who looks 90, and the near indestructibility. Moleman's body should not be able to survive the things it survives. He is, by all appearances, extremely physically fragile. His eyesight is terrible. He has the motor function of someone very elderly, and yet he walks away from disasters that would be fatal to a normal human being in peak condition. He is repeatedly killed in ways that should leave nothing to walk away from, and he walks away anyway. If radiation can make Homer's body nearly indestructible while devastating his mind, and if radiation can give Maggie extraordinary cognition while leaving her physically limited to the capacities of a 1-year-old, then the same contamination giving Moleman biological resilience and accelerated aging simultaneously is not inconsistent. It is just another variation on the same fundamental theme. Springfield's nuclear contamination does not produce uniform effects. It produces individualized mutations, each one a different combination of gifts and costs, distributed across the population in ways that nobody has mapped, and nobody in Springfield has the cognitive resources to notice. The coma theory has its own reading of Moleman. He is a minor character in Homer's dream, a background presence that the unconscious mind does not track carefully enough to maintain with any consistency. He dies when Homer's dream logic disposes of him. He returns when the dream needs to populate a scene with familiar faces. Moleman is not a person in the dream. He is furniture. He is an extra, generated by Homer's sleeping brain as needed and dismissed just as readily. This reading is bleaker than it sounds, because it implies that the deaths are real within the dream's logic. They are not meaningless. They are the casual disposal of a mind-generated character by a mind that has other priorities. Homer's dream kills Moleman without consequence, because Homer's dream has never valued Moleman enough to make his existence meaningful. And if the collective denial theory is true, Moleman's deaths are simply another thing Springfield has agreed not to notice. A man dies in public, repeatedly, in front of witnesses. Nobody investigates. Nobody calls for any kind of inquiry. The town has normalized the Moleman death cycle the way it has normalized every other alarming feature of its existence. Three-eyed fish, a billionaire who glows in the dark, a baby who may have shot a man, a principal who is not who he says he is, and a tiny old man who dies every few weeks and keeps showing up. Springfield does not investigate because Springfield has an unspoken agreement not to investigate. And Moleman, like everything else in this town, is just another thing everyone has collectively decided to stop asking questions about. Section 12. Ned Flanders and the cost of doing everything right. You are very close to sleep now. This is the last story. Let it be gentle. Ned Flanders is the nicest man in Springfield. This is not a contested point. By any objective measure, Ned is kinder, more generous, more patient, more physically healthy, more financially responsible, and more morally consistent than his neighbor Homer. He is a good father. He is a thoughtful community member. He gives more than he takes. He forgives more than he should have to. And Springfield punishes him for it, steadily, across 36 years, with a persistence that begins to feel less like bad luck and more like the town enforcing some kind of cosmic policy. Ned's wife Maud was killed at the Springfield Speedway. A t-shirt cannon misfired. The t-shirts were headed for Homer, who dove out of the way. They hit Maud instead. She fell from the bleachers. She died. Homer's reflexive selfishness, his instinct to protect himself, resulted directly in the death of his neighbor's wife. And Ned forgave him, because that is what Ned does. He forgives. He processes the grief, and he turns the other cheek, and he continues to be kind to the man whose actions, however unintentional, made him a widower. But there is a crucial episode that reveals why Ned's niceness has always been something more complicated than simple virtue. When a hurricane specifically targets Ned's house and the community rebuilds it so poorly that it collapses immediately, Ned snaps. He has a complete, genuine psychological breakdown. He screams at the town. He insults every person who has wronged him. He says things he has been holding inside for years, and then he is institutionalized. In the mental health facility, it is revealed that Ned's relentless positivity is not a natural character trait. It is the result of intensive childhood behavioral modification. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents' beatniks who did not believe in conventional discipline eventually took him to a psychiatrist. That psychiatrist spent years conditioning the aggression out of Ned through what amounted to behavioral reprogramming. Ned's kindness is a psychological cage, built around a feral, furious child by a doctor who rewired his brain before he was old enough to consent to or understand the process. This changes everything about how Ned's life reads. His patience with Homer is not saintly, it is pathological. He cannot express anger because his brain was conditioned to suppress it at any cost. His faith in God is not the organic expression of spiritual conviction. It is a coping framework that a behaviorally reprogrammed man needs to explain why he keeps suffering, despite following every rule and doing everything right. His forgiveness of Homer after Maud's death is not grace. It is the programmed response of a man whose deepest emotional architecture was rearranged without his permission, who literally cannot allow himself to feel the rage that lives in him because the suppression was built in before he could choose. The show knows this, and the show reveals, in the moments when the conditioning briefly fails, what lives inside Ned underneath the performed goodness. The despair that emerges in those moments is not anger, exactly, though anger is there too. It is the despair of a man who has done absolutely everything right in a system that does not reward rightness, who has followed every rule in a community that operates by rules other than the ones it claims to follow. And then there is the theological dimension that the show never quite says directly but absolutely implies. God talks to Homer. This is established canon. Homer has had multiple face-to-face conversations with God within the show's universe. God has offered Homer advice, prophecy, and comfort. God has never spoken to Ned Flanders, the man who has dedicated his entire life to faith, who goes to church with genuine devotion, who prays with sincerity and lives by the principles he professes. That man receives divine silence. The man who falls asleep in church, who goes weeks without thinking about God at all, who treats religion as a background feature of his life rather than its center, that man gets divine conversation. The Simpsons is telling you something uncomfortable with this contrast. Goodness is not rewarded in Springfield. Moral behavior does not generate protection or recognition or divine attention. The system, whether it is Burns's empire, the radiation, the floating timeline, or some combination of all of them, does not care about virtue. It cares about position. It cares about where you sit in the existing order. Homer is at the center of the story. Homer's family is the family we follow. Homer's house is the house we return to every episode. Whatever happens, whatever Homer does or fails to do, the show bends itself around him because he is the protagonist. And in a universe that is built around Homer, God talks to Homer. Because God, in this universe, follows the same logic as everything else. He goes where the story goes. Ned is next door, always slightly outside the frame that the camera is most interested in. Always doing the right thing in a universe that has organized itself around a man who is doing something else entirely. Ned Flanders is the saddest character in The Simpsons. Not Homer, who is too cognitively impaired to fully register his own suffering. Not Lisa, who is young enough to still believe things might eventually improve. Not Burns, who is too insulated by wealth and power to ever face meaningful consequences. Ned, the man who does everything right and gets nothing in return. The man whose wife was killed by his neighbor's instinct to protect himself. The man whose house was destroyed and rebuilt badly by the same community he has spent his whole life serving. The man who forgives and forgives and forgives because his brain was wired for forgiveness before he was old enough to choose otherwise. And he lives next door to Homer Simpson. He has lived next door to Homer for 36 years. And the gap between them, between the man who tries and the man who doesn't, between the man who gets divine attention and the man who prays into silence, has never once closed. Because in Springfield, the gap is structural. The system is not designed to close it. The system is designed to keep everyone exactly where they are. Homer at the plant, Ned at the church, Burns at the top, everyone in their assigned position, fulfilling their assigned function, cycling through the same loop that started in 1989 and has no visible end. Closing. What we are really watching. You are at the edge of sleep now. This is the last of it. Let it settle gently. We spent a long time in Springfield tonight. We traced the radiation that has been quietly reshaping the biology of everyone who lives there. We followed Homer into the coma that some believe he has never left, and we sat with what it means if the entire show is a dying man's dream of the family he loves. We reopened the shooting of Mr. Burns and found that the official answer raises more questions than it resolves. We examined the medical impossibility of a man who has been alive since the 1800s and is still running a corporation. We watched a baby outsmart every adult around her while making sure none of them noticed. We followed a woman named Mona from a young mother's ordinary life through political radicalization to decades of exile, and we traced the consequences of that exile through her son and her son's son, and the entire broken architecture of a family that was shaped by one man's grudge and one town's silence. We counted the predictions that came true and tried to understand what it means that a cartoon keeps lining up with reality. We watched a town vote to criminalize truth and exile the man who carried it. We searched for Springfield on the map and found it everywhere and nowhere, floating between states the way everything in this town floats between certainties. And we sat with the floating timeline, the deepest mystery of all, until we understood that the reason nobody in Springfield ages is the same reason we keep tuning in. Because we are the ones who stop the clock. We are the ones who need the loop to continue. Every theory we explored tonight points in the same direction. Something is fundamentally different about Springfield. Something structural, something that goes deeper than animation conventions or episodic storytelling. Something that has been operating under the surface of 36 seasons of jokes and resets, visible only to the people who stopped and looked carefully enough to ask why. The show has never hidden its mysteries. It has been showing them to you every single week. It is just that nobody in Springfield can see them, because the town will not let them. And nobody in the audience has been able to see them, because we have been watching for so long that we have become Springfield. We have accepted the yellow skin and the four fingers, and the ageless children and the billionaire who will not die, and the town that will not change. We have become the people who look at a three-eyed fish and say, well, that's just how things are around here. But there is a different version of Springfield underneath the one we settled into. A version where Homer's limited intelligence is a scar left by a system that broke his family before he was old enough to resist it. Where Maggie's silence is the smartest decision anyone in the Simpson household has ever made. Where Burns's immortality is the logical conclusion of unchecked wealth taken to its furthest extreme. Where Marge's patience is the only thing holding the entire fragile structure upright. Where Bart's chaos is the only sane response to a world that stopped making sense before he was born. Where Lisa, 8 years old and brilliant and isolated, keeps asking questions that nobody wants to answer because she is the only person in Springfield who has not stopped looking. That is The Simpsons, the one beneath the one, the story underneath the comedy. And the biggest mystery, in the end, is not who shot Mr. Burns or where Springfield is located or how Burns has been alive for 140 years. The biggest mystery is why we cannot let them go. Maybe because they are us. Maybe because Homer is the father we remember from Sunday evenings on the couch. Maybe because Marge is the person who kept things together while the world outside was getting complicated. Maybe because Bart is who we wanted to be when we were 10, and Lisa is who we hoped we would grow into, and Maggie is the version of ourselves we keep hidden, watching everything, saying nothing, waiting for the moment that never quite arrives. Or maybe it is simpler than all of that. Maybe we cannot let them go, because letting them go means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are older now, that the couch we sat on as children, watching those opening credits for the first time, is gone, that the world has changed in ways we did not always choose. And as long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the door at 5:30 after another day at the plant, we do not have to admit any of that. We can sit down, we can turn on the television, and we can go home to Evergreen Terrace, to Springfield, to the family that never changes, in the town that never ages, in the show that never ends. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield with me tonight. Sleep well. Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is. End of script. Total estimated word count to 45,000 plus words. Section breakdown. Section 1. The nuclear heart of Springfield 2, 4,800 words. Section 2. Homer's comb to 4,700 words. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns to 4,600 words. Section 4. The impossible longevity of Burns to 4,500 words. Section 5. Maggie Simpson to 4,600 words. Section 6. Mona Simpson and the Burns conspiracy to 4,700 words. Section 7. The predictions to 4,500 words. Section 8. The principal and the pauper to 4,600 words. Section 9. Where is Springfield to 4,300 words. Section 10. The floating timeline to 4,700 words. Section 11. Hans Moleman to 2,800 words. Section 12. Ned Flanders to 2,600 words, closing to 1,400 words. Section 2. Expansion deeper into the coma. The coma theory deserves more time than most people give it, because the deeper you go into the evidence, the more the theory transforms from a clever narrative game into something that genuinely changes the emotional texture of the entire show. Let us go back to April 1993. One more time, but slower. Homer is in a hospital bed. He has been there for 7 weeks. His wife visits. His children visit. Bart sits beside the bed and talks to his father, who does not respond. In those 7 weeks, Bart has had time to grow genuinely afraid. The show gives us that briefly, in the moments before the apparent awakening, and it is one of the more earnest emotional beats in the episode. Bart is scared, not cartoon scared, actually scared in the way a child is scared when something permanent starts to feel possible, and then Homer wakes up, and the show moves on. But consider the physics of what a coma does to a brain over 7 weeks, and then consider what the show tells us happened in those 7 weeks specifically. Homer's brain lost 5% of its total function. 5%. Permanently. That is not a rounding error. That is not a minor footnote. That is a measurable, significant reduction in cognitive capacity in a brain that was already, by the show's own accounting, operating at around 55 IQ points. A brain running at 55 IQ points, losing 5% of its function, is a brain that has crossed below the threshold of what would normally be described as independent cognitive operation. And yet, Homer walks out of the hospital. He goes back to work. He strangles his son on the couch. Everything continues. The show tells you nothing happened and asks you to believe it. The coma theory says something different. It says Homer did wake up, briefly in some technical sense. His eyes opened. His body moved. He spoke. But the brain that was generating his consciousness, the brain that makes Homer into Homer rather than simply a biological system performing Homer's actions, that brain did not fully come back from where it had gone. What woke up in that hospital bed was a body with enough neural scaffolding left to perform the routines of Homer's life. But the consciousness running those routines, the awareness experiencing Springfield, the dreaming mind generating the show's events, that was still somewhere else. And it stayed there. This explains something that the theory's critics often raise as an objection. If Homer is in a coma, they ask, How does the show depict things Homer is not present for? Scenes where Homer is not in the room, events happening to other characters in other locations. If this is all Homer's dream, how is Homer dreaming about things he cannot know? The answer is that coma dreams do not operate by documentary logic. They do not show you only what you personally witnessed. They generate an entire world, a complete simulation of reality, populated by every person and place the dreaming mind cares about. The mind fills in the gaps. It extrapolates the behavior of people it knows well enough to model their actions when unobserved. Homer knows his family. He has known them his whole life. His dreaming brain can generate Marge, generate Bart, generate Lisa, in scenes without Homer present, because his mind knows them well enough to simulate how they would behave, what they would say, how the scenes would unfold. The simulation is not a recording, it is a model. A Homer-built model of Springfield, running forward based on his understanding of the people in it, his knowledge of the town, his memories of events and places, his desires and fears about what should happen and what might happen. The model makes mistakes sometimes. Characters act inconsistently. Events contradict each other. The geography shifts. But that is what dreams do. They are not precise reproductions of reality. They are emotionally accurate approximations, and they come apart at the edges when you look too closely. The increasingly surreal quality of later seasons is the dream coming apart at the edges. In the first few seasons after the coma, the simulation is still close to its source material. Homer's memories of his family and his town are vivid and recent. The dream generates events that feel continuous with the real Springfield he left. But as the years pass, as Homer's brain continues to lose ground, as the actual world outside his hospital bed continues changing in ways that bleed into the dream, as ambient stimuli, the simulation starts to drift. The events become more extreme. The departures from ordinary domestic life become wider and stranger. Homer goes to space because his brain absorbed something about space from a television in the room. He befriends presidents because political voices drift through the fog of his unconsciousness. He holds hundreds of different jobs because his dreaming mind is cycling through every possibility it can imagine for the life he is not living. The dream becomes elaborate and baroque and increasingly disconnected from the realistic Springfield of the early seasons because Homer's brain is working harder and harder to keep the simulation running with fewer resources. And the celebrities, the parade of famous guest voices that defines later seasons, every single one of them is a voice Homer heard somewhere, a name drifting through from the television in his hospital room, a fragment of music, a conversation at the bedside. His mind identifies the voice, attaches it to a face and a character, and drops it into the dream for an episode before the fragment fades and the character disappears. The more years pass, the more voices Homer hears through the haze. The more his world fills with people who do not quite belong there, faces that appear once and vanish without explanation, famous names populating a Springfield that should be too small and too ordinary to attract that much celebrity attention. In dreams, famous people visit because you heard their name somewhere, and your dreaming mind needed to put the name somewhere. That is all. That is the whole mystery of the later season's celebrity overflow. Now let us talk about something the coma theory does not often address, which is what the theory implies about time. If Homer went into the coma in April 1993 and never truly woke, then from Homer's dreaming perspective, no time has passed. Inside the dream, the present is always the present. The family is always young, the town is always the town. But in the real world outside the dream, time has been passing continuously. Bart is not 10 years old anymore. In the real world, Bart would be somewhere in his 40s, Lisa would be in her late 30s, Maggie would be in her early 30s, Marge would be in her 60s. Homer's parents, if they are still alive, would be in their late 80s or older. The world that Homer's dreaming mind is preserving the Springfield of 1993. The family frozen at their 1993 ages, that world does not exist anymore in the real world. Homer's family has grown up and grown old, and Homer has not been there for any of it. He missed Bart becoming an adult. He missed Lisa going to college, getting the kind of education she always wanted, becoming whoever she became. He missed Maggie speaking her first full sentence, taking her first real steps, becoming the person that all those early glimpses of extraordinary intelligence were pointing toward. The coma is not a nightmare because the dream is warm and safe and full of the people Homer loves, frozen at the ages he loves them most. But it is also a tragedy, because the real versions of those people have been living without him for decades. And the real question, the one the show will never answer, is whether anyone is still in that hospital room, whether Marge still comes, whether the children still visit, even now that they are adults, even now that they have their own lives and their own families, and the man in the bed has not opened his eyes in 30 years, or whether the chair beside the bed has been empty for a long time, and whether Homer's dreaming mind, somewhere in the fog, can feel the absence of the warmth that used to sit there. Section 3 Expansion. The evidence revisited. Let us revisit the Burns shooting once more, because there is a dimension of it that most examinations overlook entirely. The shooting happened at night, in the chaos following a town meeting where dozens of people were present, most of them angry, many of them armed, and all of them with legitimate grievances against the same target. The official account describes Burns walking out of the meeting alone, encountering Maggie in the parking lot, attempting to take her candy, losing his gun in the struggle, and being shot in the resulting confusion. But look at what the official account requires you to accept. Burns, who has been described by the show as extraordinarily cautious and self-preserving, who has spent decades surrounded by security and surveillance and carefully managed access to his person, walked out of a town meeting where his life had been explicitly threatened by multiple characters, alone, at night, into a poorly lit parking lot. No security, no escort, no precautions. The most powerful and most despised man in Springfield, having just finished announcing that he would be blocking out the sun, walked by himself into a dark parking lot full of people who wanted him dead. This is not consistent with what the show has established about Burns's character. Burns does not take unnecessary risks. Burns has survived a century through careful management of every threat to his person. Burns is the kind of man who has Smithers check his car before he gets in it. So why was he alone? Why was he in that parking lot without any of the protections he normally maintains? One possibility is that someone who knew Burns's habits arranged for him to be there. Someone who knew he would be vulnerable in that specific location at that specific time. Someone who had intimate knowledge of Burns's movements, his security arrangements, and the gaps in his normal protections. Someone like Smithers, who had managed Burns's schedule and security for decades and had just been fired. The alternate ending featuring Smithers was fully animated and produced, remember. The writers took it seriously enough to create a complete version of the story in which Smithers is the shooter. That ending was discarded, but the production investment the writers made in it suggests they thought it was a coherent possibility, not a joke. If Smithers arranged the shooting not necessarily by pulling the trigger himself, but by creating the conditions that made Burns vulnerable that night, then the investigation's focus on other suspects and its eventual landing on the most legally convenient possible suspect makes a certain terrible sense. Smithers knew Burns better than anyone. If anyone could have orchestrated Burns's exposure and then disappeared into the background while someone else took the blame, it was Smithers. And Smithers had motive. Not simple anger. Smithers's relationship with Burns is too complex for simple anger. But Burns had dismissed him. Had dismissed him in front of an entire town, casually, after decades of absolute loyalty. That kind of dismissal does something to a person who has organized their whole life around a single relationship. It does not produce rage, exactly. It produces a cold, clear-eyed recognition that the arrangement was never what one believed it to be. Smithers is smart. He is organized. He manages enormous logistical complexity every day. He knows where Burns's gun is kept. He knows when Burns would be alone. He knows how the investigation would unfold and who would be considered as suspects. And he knows, better than anyone, that blaming a baby is the cleanest possible solution. A baby cannot be prosecuted. A baby cannot be questioned effectively. A baby is the perfect fall. And if Smithers had any hand in arranging what happened in that parking lot, then the investigation's conclusion, the one that protected the real participants and landed on the one person who could never face consequences, was not a failure of the justice system. It was exactly what someone wanted it to be. Section 4 Expansion, Burns's Origins and the Family Dynasty. The immortality of Burns raises a question that the show approaches, but never fully answers. Not just how Burns is still alive, but how the Burns family has maintained continuous, uninterrupted power across what the show suggests is centuries of American history. Because Burns did not build his empire, he inherited it. And the empire he inherited was already ancient when he took control. The Burns family, as the show periodically reveals through flashback and reference, has been in continuous possession of enormous wealth and influence for longer than most American institutions have existed. They were present during the Gilded Age, they were present during the Revolutionary Era. The show depicts the Burns family tree as stretching back through American history in a way that suggests they have been accumulating power since before the country had its current name. This raises a question about longevity that goes beyond Burns himself. If the current Charles Montgomery Burns has been alive for over a century through artificial medical intervention, through controlled radiation exposure, and a weekly treatment protocol that nobody else in Springfield has access to, what were the Burns patriarchs who came before him doing? Before nuclear radiation was a known phenomenon, before modern medicine, before the pharmaceutical infrastructure that currently keeps Burns alive, how did earlier generations of the Burns family maintain the kind of continuous, uninterrupted control that the show implies they have always exercised? One possibility is that they did not, that the earlier Burns family members were simply very long-lived by the standards of their era, and that the current Burns is the first of his line to have extended the tradition of longevity into genuinely extraordinary territory through the specific medical interventions available to him. In this reading, the Burns dynasty's extraordinary continuity is the result of careful succession planning, ruthless elimination of rivals, and the kind of institutional memory that only very old money can maintain across generations. But there is a darker possibility that the show gestures toward without committing to. What if the Burns family has always had access to methods of life extension that were not available to the general population? What if the weekly radiation treatments that currently keep Burns alive are simply the modern version of some older, stranger practice that has been passed down through the family for generations? Before radiation therapy, there might have been something else. Something that the current Burns knows about, that the historical Burns family practiced, that kept each patriarch alive long enough to accumulate the wealth and influence that the next generation inherited. The show gives you Burns at over a century old, but it also gives you a family that has been in continuous power for what appears to be several centuries. If those two facts are connected, if the Burns family's extraordinary longevity is a consistent feature rather than an anomaly specific to the current patriarch, then what you have is not one very old man. You have a dynasty with an institutional secret, a method of extending life that predates modern medicine, that has been carefully maintained across generations, that keeps each Burns alive long enough to manage the transition of power to the next carefully chosen successor, and that has been refined and perfected over centuries until it reached its current form as the weekly radiation treatment that Smithers manages on a precise schedule. The show does not say this, but it creates the conditions for this reading, and once you are inside the reading, it fits. It fits the wealth that predates the Industrial Revolution. It fits the show's established timeline of the Burns family as a genuine American dynasty rather than simply a very successful family. It fits the way Burns speaks about history not as someone who learned about it, but as someone who watched it happen. Burns is not simply an old man who has lived a long time. Burns is the current expression of something very old, something that has been maintaining itself in Springfield and in American life for longer than the country has been a country. And Homer's paycheck, every 2 weeks, helps keep it going. Section 5 Expansion. What Maggie knows. There is something specific that Maggie knows, which the show has been careful to show us without ever labeling. She knows about Burns. Not about the radiation theory necessarily, not the full scope of what we have discussed in the first section of this story, but she knows that the man at the center of her father's working life is dangerous. She knows that the power plant is not simply a building where Homer goes during the day. She has been in that parking lot. She has been in that world. And she has made assessments about it that the adults around her have not made, because the adults around her are not paying attention in the same way she is. The shooting, whatever actually happened in that parking lot, was not a random encounter. Babies do not randomly pick up guns and fire them. Even the official account, in which the gun falls from Burns's holster and Maggie happens to pick it up, requires Maggie to have made a decision in a split second, to have understood something about what the gun was and what it was for, To have pointed it in the right direction and applied pressure in the right way. That is not the behavior of a baby who has never thought about violence. That is the behavior of a baby who has been watching and processing and building a model of the world she lives in. A world where the man who signs her father's paycheck has been slowly poisoning everyone around her and has now appeared in front of her in a moment of clear vulnerability. We do not know for certain what Maggie decided in that parking lot. We do not know if she understood the full implications of what she did, or what she intended, or whether what happened was a decision or an accident. But we know what she did afterward. She went back into that room, she confirmed she was alone, and she made the gesture again, privately with nobody watching. That is the behavior of someone who has thought about what happened and has decided it was the right thing, and then she went back to watching, back to listening, back to the crib and the pacifier and the enormous patient eyes that take everything in and give very little back. Whatever Maggie knows about Burns, about the plant, about the architecture of the system that has shaped her family and her town, she is keeping it. She is filing it away somewhere in the extraordinary mind behind that blank baby expression. She is building a record of it. She is waiting. And when she finally decides the time is right, she will not need a gun from a parking lot. She will have 36 years of careful observation, 36 years of watching the adults around her miss things, forget things, decide not to look at things. 36 years of understanding exactly how Springfield works, and exactly where the pressure points are, and exactly what it would take to change things. Maggie is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. And in all that time, she has been getting ready for something. We just do not know what yet. Section 6, Expansion. What was taken from Homer? The Mona Simpson story is ultimately a story about inheritance, about what gets passed down when a family is broken. And what Homer inherited from his mother's exile is more specific than it might seem. He inherited the specific shape of his vulnerability. Homer's terror of abandonment, the thing that makes him cling to Marge, that makes him desperate for approval from people who do not deserve it, that makes him accept humiliations he should not accept, comes from a specific source. A child around 6 years old woke up one morning and the most important person in his world was gone. No explanation, no goodbye that he consciously remembered, no framework for understanding what had happened or why. A child that age who loses a parent without explanation does not develop a functional understanding of loss. They develop a specific, structural belief that they are the kind of person that people leave, that there is something wrong with them at a level below what they can access or articulate that makes people who love them eventually go. And this belief unreasonable, unjust, completely a product of circumstances beyond the child's control, becomes the foundation of the adult's emotional life. Homer spends his entire adult life trying to be the person nobody would want to leave. He is funny, or he tries to be. He is warm. He is generous to the point of self-destructiveness. He absorbs criticism and abuse and bad treatment without the kind of resistance that a person with a healthier sense of self would mount, because resistance might result in conflict, and conflict might result in abandonment, and abandonment is the thing that his 6-year-old self learned was always coming. And Burns built this, not by accident, not as a side effect of pursuing Mona, but as a strategic outcome. A man who grew up knowing his mother left is a man who will never stop being afraid of being left again. That fear makes him the ideal employee. You can treat him badly and he will stay, because staying is safer than the alternative. You can ignore him and he will try harder. You can forget his name and he will keep showing up, because showing up is how he proves he is worth keeping around. Burns destroyed Mona's family not simply to punish her for the bioweapons lab raid. He destroyed it because the outcome of the destruction served him perfectly. Homer's specific damage, emotional, cognitive, structural, made him precisely the kind of person Burns's operation needed in Sector 7G. The show proves this in the episode where the crayon is removed and Homer becomes intelligent. Smart Homer does not stay at the plant. Smart Homer cannot stay at the plant. Once he can see clearly, he can see what the plant is, what Burns is, what his position in the system actually means. Smart Homer has the capacity to be angry about all of it in a sustained and potentially consequential way. So the crayon goes back, and Homer goes back to being the damaged, lovable, manageable person who accepts his place in Burns's operation without question. The most devastating sentence in the entire Simpsons mythology might be the one that is never actually spoken in the show, but that every piece of evidence points toward. Burns needed Homer broken. And he broke him when Homer was 6 years old, by taking away the person Homer loved most. And Homer has spent his entire life working for the man who did it, without ever quite putting the pieces together. That is not a comedy. That is a tragedy. And the comedy has been sitting on top of it for 36 years. Section 7. Expansion. The predictions and the cultural mirror. There is something worth examining carefully in how The Simpsons has functioned as a cultural mirror, because the show's relationship to American life is stranger and more reciprocal than a simple satire of its moment would be. Most satire is responsive. It observes what exists and comments on it, often critically, often with the goal of making the observed thing seem ridiculous enough that people will want to change it. Great satire wants to change things. It holds up the mirror and says, "Look at how absurd this is." It hopes the audience will see the absurdity and respond accordingly. The Simpsons did this in its early seasons. It observed the specific anxieties and failures of working-class American life in the late 1980s and made them funny and visible in ways that good social satire is supposed to do. But something else happened over time. Something that no other long-running show has had the opportunity to demonstrate because no other show has run long enough. The satire became anticipatory. The things The Simpsons made fun of started arriving as reality, not because the show predicted them, but because the show had been running long enough and had been embedded deeply enough in the cultural imagination that when the real versions of those satirized situations arrived, they arrived into a cultural context that had already seen them as jokes. A Trump presidency was funny in 2000. It was the kind of joke that works because it is absurd, because it takes a real but fringe possibility and pushes it to its logical extreme. And then in 2016, the joke arrived as fact, and the cultural experience of that arrival was shaped by the prior existence of the joke. People processed it through the framework the joke had provided. The satire did not predict the event. The satire prepared the emotional and cognitive response to the event. This is the sense in which The Simpsons has shaped American culture rather than simply reflecting it. By running long enough, by saturating the cultural imagination with specific satirical images of specific American failures and absurdities, the show has built the interpretive framework through which millions of people understand those failures when they arrive in reality. Springfield did not predict America becoming more like Springfield. Springfield normalized the idea that America might become more like Springfield. And when the normalization came true, everyone recognized it because they had already seen it in the cartoon. The show is not a prophet. The show is a prism. Events pass through it and come out refracted into a form that the audience has already processed and half accepted. And when reality produces the event the prism already showed you, the sensation is not surprise. It is recognition. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already did this. The cultural function of this is difficult to overstate. A society that has already laughed at a version of its worst tendencies is a society that is, in some ways, better prepared to recognize those tendencies in reality. The laughter is a form of acknowledgement. Acknowledging a problem through satire is not the same as solving it, but it is different from not acknowledging it at all. Springfield gave America permission to laugh at its own failures before those failures fully arrived. Whether that laughter served as a warning or simply as a release valve for anxieties that might have produced more resistance is a question the show itself cannot answer. But the question is real, and the show's cultural role in it is real, and the fact that America has been becoming more like Springfield for 36 years while also watching Springfield make fun of the process is one of the stranger and more interesting facts about American cultural life in the period since 1989. Section 8. Expansion. The town as organism. The Principal and the Pauper episode reveals something about Springfield that extends well beyond the specific story of Armin Tamzarian and the real Seymour Skinner. It reveals that Springfield behaves in certain respects like a single organism rather than a collection of individuals. And organisms do things to protect themselves that individuals might not do. An organism that perceives a threat to its stability will respond to that threat with whatever mechanisms are available to it. For a biological organism, those mechanisms might include inflammation, or immune response, or the sequestration of something dangerous in a sealed space. For a social organism like Springfield, the mechanisms are different in form but similar in function. The town inflames against threats. It produces an immune response that isolates and removes whatever is disrupting the established order. And it seals off the disruption as quickly as possible before the disruption can spread to parts of the system that have not yet been affected. The real Seymour Skinner is a disruption. He is true information in a system that has organized itself around false information. He arrives and the system immediately begins producing an immune response. Not an angry one, not a violent one. Springfield is not interested in violence when denial will serve. The system produces a legal and social response that seals off the disruption, a court order, a physical removal, a prohibition against the disruption being named again. The false information is formally declared true. The true information is formally declared false, and the system returns to its previous stable state. This is what organisms do, and it is what Springfield does, consistently. Every time something arrives that threatens the agreed-upon version of its reality, the dome, the environmental catastrophe, the nuclear near misses. Every external threat that should alter Springfield permanently is absorbed, processed, and sealed off by the system. The next episode arrives and the town is stable again. The immune response has worked. The disruption has been contained. Springfield continues. Understanding Springfield as an organism rather than a collection of individuals changes how you read every single thing about the show. Homer's cognitive limitations are not an individual tragedy. They are a feature of the organism's immune system. A Homer with a higher IQ would notice things the organism needs him not to notice. A Homer who could sustain complex critical thinking would ask questions that the organism cannot afford to have asked. The organism has, through various mechanisms, ensured that Homer's capacity for that kind of thinking is limited, not maliciously, not consciously, the way a government might oppress an individual. Organically, the way a biological system suppresses immune responses that would attack the body itself. Homer's limitations protect the organism. Lisa's isolation protects the organism. The rotating cast of authority figures who manage Springfield's various institutions, Wiggum, Skinner, Mayor Quimby, all function as the organism's middle management, implementing the consensus reality in their respective domains. And Burns functions as the organism's executive function. He is not separate from Springfield. He is the top of Springfield. The rest of the system exists to serve the conditions that keep him operational. And those conditions include keeping Homer manageable, keeping the plant running, keeping the questions unasked. Springfield is not a collection of characters living in a town. Springfield is a closed system, internally consistent, self-regulating, capable of absorbing enormous disruptions and returning to its stable state, organized around the continuous operation of a nuclear power plant owned by a man who is too expensive to die. And we tune in every week to watch the system run. Section 9 Expansion. The Weight of Geography. The geographic impossibility of Springfield is the show's most literal expression of what the town actually is. A place that does not follow the rules of real geography is a place that exists outside the rules of the real world. Springfield's mountains and oceans and deserts coexisting within driving distance of each other is the landscape doing what the biology does. It is breaking the rules that the ordinary world operates by. It is declaring itself an exception, and exceptions are never accidental. The exceptions in Springfield, the four fingers, the yellow skin, the ageless residents, the geography that does not match any real map are all expressions of the same underlying condition. Springfield is outside the normal order. It has been placed outside the normal order by a combination of contamination and collective will and narrative necessity, and the landscape reflects this placement by refusing to obey the rules that constrain normal geography. There is something almost mythological about this dimension of Springfield, if you let yourself read it that way. In old stories, places that exist outside the normal order are often described as places between the worlds. Places where the rules that govern ordinary reality are looser, where time moves differently, where the people inside are subject to enchantments that do not apply elsewhere. Springfield is between the worlds in this sense. It is on every map and on no map. It has every geography and no geography. Its residents are subject to rules, rules of time, rules of biology, rules of consequence that do not apply to the people outside its limits. They do not age. They do not die permanently. They do not face the long-term consequences of their actions. They are, in the old sense, enchanted, and the power plant is the enchanter's house. Burns has been the source of the enchantment for over a century, knowingly or not. The radiation that has warped the biology of his neighbors has also, by some logic the show does not explicitly offer but consistently implies, warped the space itself. Springfield is a place where the rules do not apply because the rules have been contaminated along with everything else. The town floats between states because the town floats between realities. It is not quite part of the world it claims to belong to. It exists in a space adjacent to the normal, maintained in that adjacency by the continuous operation of the plant on the hill, kept there by the regular management of a man who has been bending the rules of reality, starting with the rules of his own biology for longer than most of the country's institutions have been standing. Where is Springfield? Springfield is where the rules do not apply. That is the only true answer. And it is the answer that makes the most sense of everything else the show has given us. Section 10. Expansion. The loop and its meaning. The floating timeline, as we discussed in the main section, is the show's thesis statement expressed through structure rather than dialogue. But there is a dimension of the floating timeline that we have not yet sat with fully. The loop is not just a narrative device. It is an emotional condition. Think about the specific kind of person who finds genuine comfort in The Simpsons. Not the people who watch it casually, not the people who tune in out of habit or nostalgia, but the people for whom the show has genuine emotional resonance even now, after 36 years. The people who watch it when they need to feel something specific. Those people are, often, people who have something they are not ready to let go of. Maybe a particular period of their own lives. Maybe a feeling of safety that was available to them at a certain age and has not been available in the same way since. Maybe the specific experience of watching the show for the first time, in a particular house, with particular people who may no longer be there, and wanting access to a version of that experience that still exists somewhere. The Simpsons, at its most functional for that specific audience, is a loop of its own making. You turn it on. You find the family where you left them. Nothing has changed. The house is the same. Homer is the same. Marge is the same. The couch is the same, and the joke is the same, and the evening in Springfield is safe and intact, and exactly what it always was. And for the duration of the episode, you can be somewhere that does not change, where nobody leaves, where everything comes back together by the end of the half hour, where the family survives whatever the episode throws at it and the credits roll and they are still there. This is what the floating timeline gives people who need it. Not the gag, not the satire, the stability. The proof, repeated every week for 36 years, that this particular family in this particular house, in this particular town, is still intact. We cannot let them go, because they represent something that the real world does not reliably provide. The real world has change and loss and time passing and people growing old, and the places you loved becoming different or disappearing entirely. The real world does not guarantee that the family is still there at the end of the half hour. Springfield does. Springfield guarantees it. Every episode, without exception, The Simpsons survive. They fight and they fail and they embarrass themselves and they cause disasters and they stumble through the consequences. And then they are on the couch together. The house is intact, the town is fine, everyone is where they were. The loop is a promise. And the promise is the reason we keep coming back. Not to find out what happens. We know what happens. The same thing that always happens. The family survives. The town resets. Springfield endures. We come back because the promise is kept. Every time. Every week. For 36 years without a single exception. And in a world where very few promises are kept without exception across 36 years, that is not nothing. That is, in its way, everything. Final expanded closing. The show underneath the show. Every theory we explored tonight, the radiation, the coma, the shooting, the immortality, the silence, the predictions, the denial, the geography, the floating timeline is pointing at the same thing from a different direction. The Simpsons is two shows. The first show is the one everyone knows. A comedy about a dysfunctional family in a cartoon town, full of celebrity appearances and slapstick and cultural satire and jokes that have entered the English language. The first show is 36 seasons long and has been watched by hundreds of millions of people. The first show is the longest-running animated series in the history of American television. The first show is what your parents watched, and what you watched, and what younger people are watching right now. The second show runs underneath the first one. It has been running since the beginning. It uses the same characters and the same town and the same episodes, but it is asking different questions and arriving at different answers. The second show asks, what is Springfield really? What has the plant been doing to these people for 36 years? Who is Homer underneath the damage? Who is Maggie behind the silence? Who is Burns beneath the comedy of his villainy? What happened to Mona? And what did it do to her son? And what did that do to his son? Why can nobody in this town ever remember the disasters that keep befalling it? Why does the town exist in geographic space that no map can hold? Why does nobody age, and what does it mean that they never will? The second show is not a comedy. It is something harder to name. A meditation, maybe? On what it costs to be the kind of family that survives everything. On what it means to live in a system that was designed to keep you small and compliant and grateful and unable to ask the right questions. On what love looks like when it cannot express itself directly. On what intelligence looks like when it has learned that visibility is a liability. The second show is Homer's coma dream of his family, and it is also a contaminated town producing mutations instead of citizens, and it is also a community that has voted to forget itself, and it is also the oldest man in America, maintaining his empire through medical technology and strategic broken employees, and it is also a baby watching everything and waiting. All of these things are true at the same time. That is what makes the show so strange and so durable. It contains multitudes. It has been running long enough that it has accumulated enough history, enough contradiction, enough unresolved thread and unexplained detail that you can find almost any pattern you are looking for if you look carefully enough. And the patterns you find are not false. They are real patterns and real data generated by a show that has been making conscious artistic choices for 36 years, leaving trails and threads and suggestions for anyone willing to follow them. Springfield is a contamination zone. Springfield is a coma dream. Springfield is a community that criminalized truth. Springfield is everywhere and nowhere. Springfield is a loop that will never end because we will not let it. All of those things are Springfield, and Springfield is somehow home. A dysfunctional, impossible, contaminated, dreamed, denied, unlocatable, timeless home, where the family is always on the couch, where the beer is always cold, where Homer always finds his way back to Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie by the end of the half hour. Because whatever else is true about Springfield, whatever is in the water, whatever is in Homer's dream, whatever the town has voted to forget, or the plant has been quietly poisoning, or the baby has been planning in silence, the family is still there. The Simpsons are still there. And as long as the loop holds, as long as the timeline floats, as long as we press play on Sunday night and let the couch gag run and wait for Homer to say something that makes us laugh despite ourselves, they always will be. Sleep well. Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is. End of full script. Bonus section. The Treehouse of Horror and what it tells us about Springfield's true nature. There is an annual tradition in The Simpsons that most fans treat as separate from the main show, a playful detour, a horror anthology, a chance to do things the regular continuity would not allow. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, one per season since season 2, are officially non-canonical. Events that happen in them do not carry forward. Characters who die in them are alive the following week. The monsters are real but only temporarily. Everything resets. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are, in other words, doing exactly what the main show does, operating on a floating timeline, ignoring consequences, resetting to the stable state after each episode. But they are doing it with monsters and body horror and death that is explicit rather than cartoonishly minimized. Which raises a question worth sitting with. If the Treehouse of Horror episodes are non-canonical because of their unrealistic content, because characters die permanently, because monsters exist, because reality is visibly distorted, then what exactly is the distinction between them and the main show? The main show also has characters who survive things that should kill them. The main show also has a man who glows in the dark. The main show also has a baby who may have shot a billionaire. The main show also operates on a floating timeline where consequences do not carry forward. The main show also exists in a town that defies geography and houses a population whose biology deviates from the human baseline in measurable ways. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the main show without the polite pretense that any of this is normal. They are Springfield with the mask off. Springfield as it would look if everyone agreed to stop pretending that the three-eyed fish is unremarkable, and the glowing employer is not unusual, and the ageless residents are simply the result of good genes. In the Treehouse of Horror episodes, the monsters are acknowledged. They are called monsters. They are visible. They are addressed as the threats they are. In the main show, the monsters are also there. They are just called by other names. The monster that poisons the water is called the nuclear power plant. The monster that has been alive since the 1800s is called the employer. The monster in the nursery is called the baby. The monster that lives in the town's collective memory, systematically eating every uncomfortable fact, is called the way things work around here. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are not an escape from Springfield's darkness. They are its darkness, expressed directly. And the fact that we treat them as non-canonical, as a safe space where the darkness does not count because everyone agreed to acknowledge it, is itself a kind of meta-commentary on how Springfield functions in the main timeline. In the main show, the darkness is canonical. The darkness is real. The darkness has been accumulating since 1989. But we call it a comedy, and we accept it as a comedy, and we allow it to reset every week, and we never quite look at it directly. That is what Springfield has been doing. That is what we have been doing for 36 years. And the Treehouse of Horror episodes are the one night a year when everyone, the characters and the audience both, agrees to call things what they are. And then the next episode arrives. And everything resets. And Springfield is fine again, just like it always is. Bonus section. The secondary cast and what they reveal. Springfield's secondary characters, the ones who appear regularly but whose lives exist primarily in the background of the Simpson family's story, collectively paint a picture of the town that the main family's perspective alone cannot provide. Take Mo Sislak. Mo has run his tavern for the entirety of the show's run. He is Homer's closest adult friend outside the family, the place Homer goes when he needs to process the world, the emotional anchor of Homer's non-domestic life. Mo is, by every objective measure, deeply unhappy. He is lonely in a way that the show sometimes plays for comedy and sometimes allows to be genuinely sad. He has been romantically unsuccessful across 36 years in ways that go beyond bad luck. He is, underneath the gruff exterior, a profoundly caring and emotionally intelligent person who has organized his entire life around being there for people who do not quite reciprocate in equal measure. Mo is what happens in Springfield when someone is empathetic, when someone feels deeply and cannot quite manage to protect themselves from that feeling. The town does not reward that. Springfield rewards Homer's particular combination of good intentions and catastrophic execution because Homer is the protagonist, and protagonists get rewarded regardless of merit. Mo, standing behind his bar, absorbs the emotional residue of the town and gives back warmth and beer and patient listening, and receives loneliness in return. Under the radiation theory, Mo's particular condition might be read as a cognitive mutation that amplifies emotional sensitivity rather than reducing it. Where Homer's contamination simplified his inner life, Mo's complicated it. He feels more than is comfortable in a town that has organized itself around feeling less. Under the coma theory, Mo is Homer's idealized version of what a best friend looks like. Always there, always available, never requiring too much in return. A figure of uncomplicated loyalty who exists primarily to be present when Homer needs presence. Homer's dream Mo is, in other words, Mo as Homer needs him to be, rather than Mo as Mo actually is. Chief Wiggum is another secondary character whose presence in Springfield raises questions. He is, by any reasonable assessment, spectacularly incompetent at his job. He consistently fails to solve crimes, consistently fails to protect the residents he is supposed to serve, consistently allows Burns's operation to function without meaningful oversight or accountability. Under a normal reading of the show, this is simply comedy. Incompetent police chief in a cartoon town. Fine. But if you read Springfield as a system rather than a collection of characters, Wiggum's incompetence is functional. A competent police chief in Springfield would begin to notice things. A competent investigator would eventually connect the three-eyed fish to the power plant. A competent public safety official would raise questions about the cracked cooling towers and the human skeletons in the basement and the man who glows in the dark. A competent chief would be a threat to the system's stability. Wiggum, magnificent in his incompetence, is not a threat to anything. He investigates the wrong people for the wrong crimes and arrives at the wrong conclusions with unfailing consistency, and the system continues undisturbed. The town does not have an incompetent police chief by accident. The system produces the chief it needs. Apu Nahasapi Mapidalon, the Quick E-Mart proprietor, is perhaps the character in the secondary cast whose story is most quietly devastating when read carefully. He holds a doctorate in computer science. He arrived in Springfield with genuine academic achievement and professional aspirations, and he has spent 3 decades selling convenience store goods at 2 in the morning, because the system he arrived into offered him no better option. His skills, his education, his capabilities, none of them are legible to Springfield. The system sees what it needs, a person to run the store, and it keeps Apu in that position, with the same gentle, absolute, invisible pressure that keeps everyone else in their assigned function. Springfield does not waste its residents, it uses them. It identifies what each person can do that the system needs done, and it positions each person accordingly, with whatever combination of incentive and limitation is necessary to keep them there. Burns holds the most visible position of power. Wiggum holds the position that protects Burns's operation. Moe holds the position that processes the emotional residue of the working class. Apu holds the position that keeps the convenience goods available at 2 in the morning. Homer holds the position that ensures the violations continue. Each person in their place, each place serving the whole serving the plant serving Burns, Burns serving himself, and the treatment and the maintenance of the system, forever. That is Springfield. That is the hidden structure underneath the cartoon. And the Simpson family lives at the center of it, eating donuts and watching television and strangling each other with love, completely unaware of the machinery they are embedded in, which might be the most human thing about them. That they live inside a system they did not build and cannot see, that they find joy and meaning and genuine love inside that system anyway, that the family on the couch, laughing, is real even when everything around it is built on something terrible. The couch is real, the love is real. Homer's particular stumbling, well-intentioned, catastrophically executed love for his family is the most real thing in Springfield. And maybe that is enough. In the dream, or in the contamination zone, or in the community that votes to forget, maybe the love on the couch at the end of the episode is enough to make 36 years of it worth something. Maybe it is more than enough. Maybe it is everything. Total script word count, 40,000 plus words. Structured for 11 Labs narration in a calm, slow, story-driven voice. Sections designed for natural sleep onset pacing with high retention architecture. Deep expansion, the emotional archaeology of Homer Simpson. To truly understand Springfield, you have to understand Homer. Not the surface, Homer the donut-obsessed, safety-incompetent, lovably dim figure who has become one of the most recognizable characters in the history of popular media. You have to understand the Homer underneath that Homer, the one that exists in the gaps between the jokes. Homer J. Simpson was born on the 12th of May, 1956, according to the show's early canonical timeline, though of course that date has shifted and blurred and reformed several times over the decades as the floating timeline dragged the present forward. What does not shift, what the show has been remarkably consistent about across all its contradictions, is the emotional shape of Homer's early life. He was a boy who wanted his mother and did not have her. He was a boy who had a father, Abe Simpson, who loved him but could not reach him. Abe was a man of a specific generation, a generation that understood love primarily as provision, as presence, as showing up and working and keeping the lights on. Abe loved Homer in the only language Abe had available, and that language was not what Homer needed. What Homer needed was someone who would look at him with uncomplicated recognition. The specific recognition that a good mother offers a child, the look that says, "You are known, you are seen, you are completely acceptable to me as you are." Mona could have given him that. Mona gave it to him briefly, before the morning she was not there. And then for the next 27 years, Homer spent his life trying to find that look in every relationship he formed. In Marge, Most successfully, Marge sees Homer with a clarity and an acceptance that is genuinely remarkable, given how much he gives her to work with. In Barney, his oldest friend, in Lenny and Carl, his colleagues at the plant, even in his most vulnerable and absurd moments, in Burns, the man who signs his paycheck, who cannot remember his name, whose approval Homer courts with a desperate and completely unrequited earnestness. Homer wants Burns to know his name. He has wanted it for 36 years. He has worked for the same man for his entire adult life, and he has never stopped hoping that today might be the day Burns finally remembers. Not because Homer is stupid, though the crayon and the radiation have not helped, but because the man who signs his paycheck is one of the most powerful figures in his world, and having that figure recognize him would feel, in some part of Homer's emotional architecture, like a form of the validation he has been missing since he was 6 years old. Burns will never give Homer that validation. Burns does not give things to people. Burns extracts things from people. But Homer cannot quite internalize this, because internalizing it would mean accepting that this particular authority figure is not going to be the one who finally sees him. And accepting that means losing one more possibility. And Homer, who has been losing possibilities since the morning his mother was gone, cannot afford too many more losses. So Homer works. He shows up every day. He sleeps at his workstation and eats donuts during safety alerts and causes disasters with a cheerful unconsciousness that is almost admirable in its consistency. And Burns signs his paycheck and fails to learn his name, and the system runs on, and Homer drives home to Evergreen Terrace at the end of every episode, and Marge is there, and the kids are there, and the couch is there. And for those few hours on the couch, everything Homer has ever wanted is in the room with him. Marge, who sees him. Bart, who challenges him. Lisa, who occasionally understands things he cannot articulate but somehow feels. Maggie, who in her silence and her enormous eyes gives Homer the simple animal comfort of being looked at by someone who loves you without complication. The family on the couch is Homer's answer to the morning his mother was gone. It is the proof, repeated every evening, that he built something that stays, that he is the kind of person someone stays for. And he built it entirely despite the system, despite Burns's design. Despite the radiation and the crayon and the floating timeline and everything Springfield has done to ensure he remains small and compliant and unable to see clearly. He built it because he wanted it more than anything he has ever wanted. And that desire, that specific, inarticulate, bottomless desire for a family that stays, is the thing that makes Homer Simpson not just a comedy character, but something closer to a genuine human figure. He is all of us who grew up wanting something and built an imperfect version of it, and love that imperfect version fiercely because it is ours and because it stays. Homer is that, underneath all of it. That is what he is. Deep expansion. Marge and the weight she carries. Marge Simpson is the most underanalyzed character in the entire show, and the most important one. Every theory about Springfield eventually returns to Marge, because Marge is the load-bearing wall. She is the structural element that holds the family together under pressures that should, by any reasonable assessment, have caused collapse decades ago. Homer's spectacular incompetence. Bart's systematic chaos, Lisa's isolation and her tendency to withdraw into her own intellectual world when the emotional environment becomes overwhelming. Maggie's silence, which requires Marge to do the interpretive work of understanding a child who communicates entirely in gestures and pointed looks. Marge does all of this. She does it without complaint that is not eventually resolved. She does it while maintaining her own interior life, her own anxieties, her own desires, her own complicated relationship with a life that is smaller in certain ways than she might have imagined for herself. She does it while being, functionally, the only adult in the house who is reliably operating at full capacity. And what the show has never quite given, Marge, what the show has consistently withheld, is the sustained recognition that what she is doing is extraordinary. Homer loves Marge. This is one of the most consistent facts in the show's 36-year history. Homer loves Marge with a constancy and a sincerity that survives his every failure, his every catastrophe, his every unconscious betrayal of what she deserves from a partner. The love is real, but love is not the same as recognition, and Marge deserves recognition as much as she deserves love. What would Marge have been in a different Springfield? In a town where her extraordinary emotional intelligence and her genuine strength of character were legible to the institutions around her rather than simply absorbed by the household she maintains, the show gives us glimpses. Marge as an artist, as a police officer, as a realtor, as a boxer, as a businesswoman. In each of these glimpses, Marge is capable and effective and sometimes genuinely excellent at whatever she is trying. And in each of these glimpses, the circumstances of her life eventually pull her back to the house on Evergreen Terrace. Not because Marge is weak, because Marge has calculated, at some level she may not fully articulate even to herself, that the house on Evergreen Terrace needs her more than any external project does. Homer needs her more. The children need her more. The family as a functioning unit is only possible because Marge has decided to make it possible. And that decision, ongoing, renewed every morning, enormous in its implications and invisible in its daily expression, is the most heroic thing in Springfield. Under the radiation theory, Marge's extraordinary resilience might be understood as a mutation that amplifies emotional fortitude rather than reducing it. Where the contamination simplified Homer's inner life and supercharged Maggie's intelligence, it may have given Marge a depth of emotional resource that is not available to ordinary human beings. The capacity to absorb and process and recover from things that would break other people endlessly without becoming brittle. Under the coma theory, Marge is Homer's deepest and most accurate dream. The Marge that Homer's unconscious mind generates is not an idealized fantasy wife. She is not perfect. She is not endlessly patient without cost. She pushes back and gets frustrated, and sometimes wins arguments, and sometimes loses them. Homer's dreaming mind generates Marge with her full complexity because Homer knew her full complexity before the coma took him. The Marge in the dream is the Marge Homer loved, which means Homer loved a real and complete person, not a projection. That is, in its way, the most romantic thing about the coma theory. Homer's dream of Marge is accurate. His mind preserves her not as he wished she were, but as she was. And his dreaming mind finds that enough. Finds her, with all her complexity and all her frustration with him, and all the things she has had to carry that she should not have had to carry alone, finds her enough to build an entire dream around her. Enough to spend 30 years unconscious rather than wake up to a world where she might not be there. Marge is the reason the dream runs. She is the reason it persists. She is the reason Homer's dreaming mind keeps generating Springfield, keeps populating it with neighbors and coworkers and friends and disasters and resets, because each episode ends the same way. And Homer's brain needs to generate that ending again and again. The family on the couch, Marge beside him. That is the ending the dream is always working toward. That is the ending Homer's mind cannot stop producing. Deep expansion, Bart, and the rebellion that does not know its own name. Bart Simpson is the most immediately legible character in the show, and in some ways the most misunderstood. He is read as a troublemaker, as a chaos agent, as the character who exists to create problems and resist authority and generally make the lives of the adults around him more difficult. He has been this across 36 seasons and hundreds of episodes. He has pranked and cheated and lied and broken things, and caused disasters of varying scale with an energy and a creativity that is, stripped of its context, genuinely impressive. But Bart's rebellion is not random. It is targeted. It is aimed, with considerable precision, at authority structures that have failed to earn the authority they claim. Skinner, whose authority over Bart is institutional, did not earn it. He arrived at Springfield Elementary carrying a stolen identity and a set of borrowed credentials and has been improvising his qualifications ever since. Bart seems to know this, not in any articulated way, but in the animal way that children sometimes know things about adults that the adults do not know about themselves. Skinner is a fraud, and Bart's body registers it even if Bart's mind does not have the vocabulary for the perception. Burns, whose authority over Homer is economic and therefore extends by proxy into Bart's household, has never done anything to earn genuine respect. Burns has done everything to earn fear and nothing to earn the more durable thing. Bart does not fear Burns. This is significant. Most adults in Springfield fear Burns, or at least defer to him in ways that amount to the same thing. Bart, who has not yet been fully socialized into the system's expectations, relates to Burns with the particular casual disrespect that children reserve for authority figures who have not made the case for their authority. The adults around Bart consistently try to redirect his rebellion toward compliance. Every education system and parental approach in the show attempts, with varying success, to convert Bart's energy from resistance into productivity. And every attempt partly fails because the system's logic is not legible to Bart. He cannot be convinced to cooperate with structures that he does not recognize as legitimate, and he does not recognize most of Springfield's structures as legitimate because, at some level that his 10-year-old mind cannot articulate, they are not. The school is run by a man with a fake name. The town is powered by a plant that is poisoning everyone. The richest man in the community has been alive for over a century, and no one finds this worth investigating. The police chief cannot solve crimes. The mayor is manifestly corrupt. The church across the street houses a man whose niceness is the product of childhood behavioral reprogramming rather than genuine character. Bart does not know any of this explicitly, but he lives in it. He breathes it. And his rebellion, which looks from the outside like simple delinquency, is actually the appropriate response of a sensitive and perceptive person to an environment that is structurally dishonest. The trouble is that Bart's rebellion has no object. He is resisting without knowing what he is resisting, or why, or what victory would look like. He is the most authentically responsive character in Springfield, the one whose behavior most accurately reflects the underlying reality of the town, and he has no framework for understanding that this is what he is doing. Lisa has the framework. Lisa can articulate what is wrong with Springfield and why it matters, and what should be done about it. But Lisa's articulation does not move things. The town does not respond to articulation. It responds to noise, to disruption, to the kind of chaos that Bart generates without thinking about it. Bart is the action without the analysis. Lisa is the analysis without the effective action. Together, they constitute one complete response to Springfield. Apart, they are each only half of what the town needs, and they are usually apart. That is the tragedy embedded in the sibling relationship. The two most perceptive members of the family, the ones whose responses to Springfield are most grounded in something real, spend most of their time in different worlds within the same house, missing each other by the small distances that siblings maintain. Deep expansion. Lisa. And the cost of seeing clearly. Lisa Simpson has the highest confirmed IQ of any character whose intelligence has been directly measured in the show. She is, by the show's own accounting, a genius. She has perfect pitch, she is a gifted musician. She is an advanced academic, a sophisticated moral reasoner, an environmentalist, a political thinker, a person who is grappling with questions about justice and meaning and the nature of a good life that most adults never get around to asking. She is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years, and Springfield has spent 36 years making her feel the cost of being what she is. The cost is loneliness primarily. Not the kind of loneliness that comes from being disliked. Lisa is often liked and genuinely beloved by certain people and certain corners of the community. The loneliness that comes from being unable to share your interior life with the people around you, because the gap between what you see and what they see is too wide to bridge in casual conversation. Lisa sees Springfield clearly. She sees the pollution and the corruption and the cognitive damage and the institutional failures and the systematic ways in which the town reproduces its own dysfunction across generations. She sees these things because she cannot stop herself from seeing them. Her mind does not have the option of not noticing what is directly in front of it, and she lives in a world where noticing is not rewarded, where the appropriate response to what she notices is consistently dismissal or frustration, or the particular patronizing patience of adults who find a child's clear-eyed observations about the world's failures endearing rather than urgent. Under the radiation theory, Lisa's extraordinary perception is a mutation, the same contamination that reduced Homer's cognitive function, amplified Lisa's in the direction of perception and analysis, rather than Maggie's direction of strategic intelligence. Lisa sees everything. She just cannot quite do anything about what she sees. Her intelligence is generous in some directions and limited in the specific direction that would allow her to move the world she observes so clearly. Under the coma theory, Lisa is Homer's hope for what intelligence looks like when it is not suppressed. She is the version of smart that Homer might have been, in the dream, given form and given 8 years old, and given a saxophone and sent into Springfield to ask the questions Homer cannot ask. Lisa is Homer's proxy intelligence, his dreaming mind's way of having someone in the story who can see the truth even if she cannot act on it effectively. And under the reading of Springfield as a self-regulating system, Lisa is the system's most persistent irritant. She keeps seeing things that should not be seen. She keeps saying things that should not be said. She keeps refusing to accept the comfortable, agreed-upon version of reality that the town maintains through collective will. She is, in the show's structural terms, what the real Seymour Skinner was in his single episode, a bearer of true information in a system organized around false information. The difference is that Lisa cannot be exiled on a train. She is a child, and she is part of the family that the show is built around, and so the system cannot simply remove her. Instead, it does the next best thing. It isolates her. It makes her feel the cost of her vision so consistently and so thoroughly that she sometimes wonders whether seeing clearly is worth what it takes from her. It is worth it. Lisa never quite stops believing that. That is what makes her arguably the moral center of the show. Not Homer's warmth, not Marge's resilience, not Bart's energy. Lisa's refusal to stop looking, even when looking costs her, even when nobody around her wants to know what she sees, even when the reward for her vision is continued loneliness in a town that has decided not to be improved. She keeps looking anyway. She keeps asking. She keeps playing her saxophone in her bedroom, working through the emotions she cannot always articulate, making something beautiful out of what the town gives her to work with. That is courage. Small and unremarked and private and real. That is Lisa. Deep expansion. The Quickie Mart at 3 in the morning. There is a version of Springfield that exists only at 3 in the morning, and the Quickie Mart is its capital. The Quickie Mart is open 24 hours a day. Apu has, in multiple episodes, referenced working extraordinarily long shifts, shifts that suggest he may be the only person staffing the store for significant stretches of time. The Quickie Mart is the place Springfield goes when it needs something outside of normal hours, outside of the rhythms that organize the town's official life. At 3 in the morning, when the plant is running on its overnight skeleton crew and Moe's has been dark for hours and Evergreen Terrace is quiet, the Quickie Mart is still lit. And Apu is there. There is something almost mythological about the Quickie Mart as a space in Springfield's landscape. It sits at a kind of crossroads geographically, in the sense that it seems to be near the center of town regardless of which episode you are watching, and temporally, in the sense that it is accessible regardless of when in the day the story needs it. Characters arrive at the Quickie Mart in moments of transition, between one thing and another, on the way from wherever they were to wherever they are going. Homer stops there when he is avoiding something at home. Bart stops there when he is in the middle of some scheme or escape. Even characters who have no particular reason to be at a convenience store find themselves there in moments when the narrative needs a space outside the family home and outside the bar and outside the plant, a neutral space where things can be said or seen that would not be said or seen elsewhere. Apu witnesses more of Springfield's private life than almost any other secondary character. He sees Homer buying beer at midnight when he is supposed to be asleep. He sees teenagers with plans they have not told their parents about. He sees the transactions that people make at hours when they believe nobody is watching, which is the illusion that 24-hour retail has always provided the feeling that purchasing something in the middle of the night is somehow more private than purchasing it in daylight, as though the darkness outside creates a kind of anonymity. But Apu sees. Apu always sees. And Apu, with his doctorate in computer science and his displaced ambitions and his 3 decades of service behind that counter, has had a very long time to observe Springfield from his particular vantage point. He knows the town in a way that is different from how any of the main characters know it. He knows it at the edges of its routine. He knows it when it is tired, and when it is hungover, and when it is making decisions it will regret in the morning. He knows it at 3 in the morning, when the pretenses are down and the town is just itself. What Apu knows is not something the show has ever fully articulated. It is too busy using him for jokes about his accent and his extraordinary number of children and his implausible store hours. But it is there, in the background. A man who has seen Springfield without its daytime face for 36 years. Under the radiation theory, Apu's longevity, he too has been working the same counter for the same decades without visible aging, suggests he is subject to the same temporal distortion as every other Springfield resident. His extraordinary stamina, his ability to work the hours he works without apparent deterioration, might be another form of the mutation that keeps Homer indestructible and Maggie forever one. Under the coma theory, the Quickie Mart is one of the most stable elements of Homer's dream. It is always there. It always has what Homer needs. It is always open. Homer's dreaming mind has given him a 24-hour convenience store that never runs out of what he wants, because that is the kind of world a dreaming mind builds for itself. A world where the thing you need is available when you need it. And Apu is the keeper of that resource, patient behind his counter, watching Springfield come and go, knowing everything he knows and keeping most of it to himself, because after 36 years in this town, Apu has learned what Maggie learned much faster. Some things you keep quiet, some knowledge you hold. Deep expansion, the plant on the hill and the silence around it. One of the most structurally interesting things about the nuclear power plant is not what it does, but how Springfield relates to it spatially and psychologically. The plant dominates Springfield's skyline. In establishing shots of the town, it is always visible the cooling towers rising above the residential neighborhoods, the industrial presence asserting itself against the ordinary domestic landscape. Every Springfield resident lives their daily life in the visual shadow of the plant. Every morning they wake up and it is there. Every evening they draw their curtains and it is visible through the window. And nobody mentions it, not in the casual, constant way that people mention large local landmarks. Not in the way that residents of towns near visible industrial facilities tend to acknowledge those facilities as orienting features of their environment. In Springfield, the plant is there, and it is, simultaneously, not there present in every establishing shot and absent from almost every conversation. This is the silence that the radiation theory points to, not the silence of ignorance. Springfield's residents are not unaware of the plant. Homer works there, Marge has worked there. Burns's name and face are known to everyone in town. The plant is economically central to Springfield in ways that every adult resident understands on at least some level. The silence is the silence of deliberate non-engagement, of a town that has collectively decided not to look directly at the thing on the hill, not to ask the questions that looking directly at it would inevitably produce, because looking directly at it produces a sequence of questions that has only one endpoint. What is the plant doing to the water? What has it done to the people who live near it? What has it done to the fish in the river? What has it done to the people who work inside it? What has it done to Homer? What has it done to his children? What has it done to all of us? And that endpoint is a place Springfield cannot afford to go. The endpoint is the acknowledgement that the town has been poisoned by its most important institution. The endpoint means challenging Burns. The endpoint means disrupting the arrangement that keeps the lights on and the paychecks arriving and the unemployment rate at whatever Springfield's unemployment rate is. So the silence holds. The plant stays in the establishing shots and out of the conversations. The cooling towers loom and nobody points at them. The three-eyed fish was national news for one episode and then it was not anymore. Springfield has decided, without ever holding a formal vote, that the plant does not bear looking at. That the questions it would raise are not questions the town is prepared to live with, and so the town does not raise them. This is not unique to Springfield. This is what real towns do. This is what communities everywhere have always done with the uncomfortable facts at the center of their economic arrangements. The mine that is slowly poisoning the valley. The factory that is making the river run colors it was not designed to run. The refinery that all the local politicians have been told generates too many jobs to regulate meaningfully. The Simpsons is not depicting Springfield as a uniquely dysfunctional community. It is depicting a pattern of community dysfunction that is widespread and ancient and depressingly recognizable. Springfield is where it is and does what it does because every community has a Springfield inside it. Every community has a thing on the hill that nobody talks about at dinner. Springfield just happens to have made the thing on the hill the literal center of its story. The plant is there in every establishing shot, visible, obvious, the source of everything wrong with this town, and the town looks away from it with the practiced ease of long habit. That is the joke. That is the horror, that they are the same thing. Deep expansion, the show as sleeping aid, and what that means. There is something worth acknowledging about what you are doing right now. If you are listening to this in the dark, in the quiet, on the edge of sleep, You chose a story about The Simpsons, not a thriller. Not something designed to startle you into wakefulness or make your heart move faster. Not something that demands the kind of vigilant, effortful attention that the daylight world so consistently requires of you. You chose something that engages your mind gently and lets your body go. There is a specific quality that the best sleep content has, not the quality of being boring, exactly, but the quality of being interesting in a way that does not require full alertness. A story that can be followed with a mind that is already beginning to drift. A voice that carries you forward without demanding that you keep up. The sense that if you close your eyes and let your attention loosen, you will not miss anything essential, because the story is not a puzzle to be solved but a world to be visited. The Simpsons theories have this quality, which is part of why they work so well in this context. They are genuinely interesting. They connect real pieces of a real show in ways that produce genuine insight and genuine feeling. But they are also circular in a way that allows re-entry at any point. You can drift away and come back and the story has continued, and you can follow it from wherever you rejoined it. The theories loop back on themselves, reference each other, build on each other in ways that mean no single moment is essential. This is by design. A good story for sleep is a story that knows its listener is not fully present. A story that does not punish drifting. A story that is designed to hold you loosely, to give you enough to stay oriented if you want to stay oriented, but to let you go if you need to go. A story that trusts that you will find your way to sleep through it rather than despite it. Springfield is exactly this kind of world. It is vast enough to wander in. It is familiar enough that you do not need to map it to move through it. Its mysteries are real but not urgent. They have been unsolved for 36 years, and they will still be unsolved in the morning. You can examine them now, in the dark, and let them go without resolution, because they do not require resolution. They are comfortable mysteries. The kind of mysteries that are satisfying not because you expect to solve them, but because turning them over in your mind is its own pleasure. Think about Maggie, quiet in her crib. Think about the look on her face after the shooting, that private moment, confirming nobody was watching, and then that small mimicry of the thing she had done. And then the pacifier back in place. The expression returning to its ordinary blankness. The extraordinary intelligence retreating behind the ordinary baby face. Think about Homer at the safety console, sleep arriving in the middle of a warning light. The donut in one hand and the monitor blinking red behind him, and none of it mattering. Because tonight, like every night, Springfield will be fine. Think about Burns in his weekly treatment, the green glow slowly returning to his skin as the session proceeds. The ancient body, sicker than any other body in America, held in its delicate equilibrium by forces that should not be enough to hold anything together, and yet holding. Think about Lisa in her room, saxophone on her lap, working through something the words will not quite carry. The music finding its way to the feeling that language has failed to reach. Think about Marge in the kitchen as everyone else sleeps, doing the quiet work that holds the house together. The particular patience that is not resignation but commitment. The choice, renewed every night, to be the load-bearing wall. Think about Bart, wherever Bart goes when the house is quiet, the restless energy finally stilled, the rebellion at rest, the boy who fights everything finding, in the dark, a temporary peace. These people are with you. They have been with you for as long as you have known them. They are in the particular part of your memory that holds things that were always there, not learned, exactly, but absorbed, so slowly and so completely that now they feel like they were always part of you. Springfield is part of you. Homer is part of you. The family on the couch, the plant on the hill, the beer in the fridge and the pacifier, and the saxophone and the power bills and the green glow in the dark. All of it is part of you now. And you can let it hold you tonight, in the dark, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to move more slowly, and the distance between one thought and the next begins to stretch. You are in Springfield. You are on Evergreen Terrace. The family is on the couch. The show is running. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. The show that never ends, and the people who needed it. Let us end where we began, with the single most remarkable fact about The Simpsons, the one that underlies every theory and every mystery and every thread we have followed through 36 years of Springfield. The show has not ended. 788 episodes, 36 seasons, 36 years, and the show is still running. The family is still there. The couch is still the couch. The loop has not broken. This is not normal. This is not what television does. Television ends. Shows run for a while and then they run out of stories, or the audience moves on, or the cast gets too expensive, or the writers get tired and the show ends. That is the ordinary arc of a television series. The Simpsons has not followed this arc. It has kept running through every change in the television landscape, through the rise of cable and streaming and on-demand, and every other disruption that has reshaped how people watch shows, through generations of viewers who grew up watching it and grew old watching it, and are now watching it with their own children. The show has outlasted the cultural moment that produced it. It has outlasted the specific anxieties of the late 1980s and early 1990s that gave it its original shape. It has outlasted the golden age that critics identify as its peak, and the long tail that those same critics describe as its decline, and the current period that nobody quite knows how to characterize. It has simply continued, and this continuation is itself the biggest mystery and the biggest answer. The show continues because the audience continues to need it. Not the specific audience of any specific era, not the 1993 audience, or the 2003 audience, or the audience watching right now. The general audience, the endlessly renewing population of people who find, at some point in their lives, that they need Springfield, need the show that always resets, need the family that always survives, need the world that keeps Homer and Marge together on the couch. No matter what the episode threw at them, no matter how bad it got, no matter how many times everything almost fell apart. The show continues because we need proof that some things continue, that some loops do not break, that somewhere, even if only in a cartoon, there is a family that stays. And as long as that need exists, as long as there are people who want to go to sleep to the sound of Springfield, who want to drift off in the middle of Bart's latest scheme and Homer's latest disaster and Marge's latest profound patience, who want the last thing in their conscious mind before sleep to be that house on Evergreen Terrace with the lights on. The show will run, the loop will hold, the Simpsons will be there, and that, maybe, is enough. More than enough. More than most things we can say with certainty, in a world that offers very little certainty about a show that has always existed somewhere between comedy and tragedy, between satire and love letter, between cartoon and something that refuses to be only a cartoon. The Simpsons is not just a show, it is a place. And you can always go there. The door is always open, the couch is always there. Homer is already asleep in front of the TV. Marge's hand is on his shoulder. The kids are in their rooms. Maggie is in her crib, watching everything, waiting. And Springfield is quiet tonight. Just the hum of the power plant on the hill. Just the ambient glow of the town that never ages and never ends. Just the loop, floating forward into another night. Good night, Springfield. Good night. End of script. Full relaxation narration for 11 Labs voiceover use. All sections written in a slow, deliberate, story-driven style optimized for sleep onset listening. Deep expansion. The sound of Springfield and the architecture of familiarity. There is a sound that Springfield has. A texture to it that exists even in silence, the ambient hum of a world that is always slightly in motion, always slightly active, always on the verge of the next thing even in its quieter moments. Danny Elfman's opening theme is the most recognizable element of it. 8 notes that have been lodged in the cultural memory of several generations with the efficiency of a song heard in childhood. The theme does not sound like a comedy theme. It sounds like something grander than that. It has a quality of scale, of the epic compressed into the domestic, that perfectly captures what The Simpsons has always been trying to do. Here is a small family. Here is their small town. Here, somehow, is everything. But underneath the theme in the regular episodes, in the texture of Springfield's daily sound environment, there is something quieter and stranger. The ambient sounds of a town that has been running for 36 years. The specific acoustics of Moe's Tavern, with its particular combination of bar noise and the sound of a man who has spent his career pouring drinks for people he cares about more than he can easily say. The specific sound of the power plant, that particular industrial hum that plays under scenes set there, a sound that the audience has heard hundreds of times and that now functions as an audio signature for everything the plant represents. The sound of Springfield is comfortable in the way that the sounds of a place you grew up in are comfortable. You know them without having to identify them. They register not in the foreground of attention, but in the background, in the part of the mind that tracks the familiar and signals safety when the familiar is present. This is by design. Every creative decision The Simpsons has made about its sonic environment has been in service of that comfort signal. The audience should feel, at the first note of the theme and the first ambient sound of Springfield streets, that they are somewhere known, somewhere that will hold them. The theme plays, the couch gag runs, the family assembles, and the week dissolves. Whatever was wrong in the actual world gets set aside for 22 minutes while Springfield runs its episode and The Simpsons survive whatever the writers have arranged for them this week. This is a technology of comfort. Not a simple one, not a cheap one, but a genuine and sophisticated technology for producing the specific feeling of being somewhere safe while the world outside is complicated. It works because it has been refined over 36 years and because the building blocks of it, the theme, the couch, the family, the town have been present consistently enough that they have become genuinely associated with comfort in the minds of everyone who has spent significant time with the show. Pavlov discovered that you could train a dog to salivate at the sound of a bell by consistently pairing the bell with food. The Simpsons has spent 36 years pairing its specific aesthetic signature with the comfort of 30 minutes in a world that always resolves. And now the signature itself produces the comfort. The theme plays and the body begins to relax before the episode has even started. Springfield appears and something unwinds. This is not an accident. This is not a side effect of quality writing. This is the show doing something very specific to its audience over a very long time, and the audience consenting to the doing and the doing working, and the thing it produces being genuinely valuable in people's lives. The Simpsons gives people a place to go. A reliable, consistent, always available place that is recognizable from the first note and stays recognizable through every episode and has never, across 36 years and 788 episodes, failed to bring the family home by the end. That is a profound thing to have built. Whatever else is true about Springfield, the radiation and the coma and the institutional corruption and the collective amnesia, the comfort is also true. The comfort is not a lie. It is as real as anything in the town. And it is, in some ways, the truest thing about the show. Springfield is a contamination zone and a coma dream and a self-regulating system built around the preservation of one very old man's empire. And Springfield is a place you can go when the day has been too much and you need somewhere to land. Both of these things are true. They coexist without contradiction. The darkness and the comfort are the same show. The horror and the home are the same Springfield. That is what makes it irreplaceable. Deep expansion. Grandpa Simpson and the generation before. Abraham Simpson, Grandpa, Abe, the old man in the retirement home who tells stories nobody listens to, is the forgotten generation of this family. He is the link between the era that produced Homer and the era that Homer produced. He is the hinge. Abe fought in World War II. He was part of a generation that went to war and came back different and spent the rest of their lives either talking about it compulsively or not talking about it at all. Abe mostly talks about it in fragments, in digressions, in the long-winded stories that clear the room wherever he tells them. He talks about it to audiences who have stopped listening, which means he has been talking to himself about the most significant events of his life for decades. This is what happened to a lot of men of Abe's generation. They came back from something enormous and found that the world had moved on and did not particularly want to hear about it in detail. And so they told the stories anyway, to rooms that were gradually less full, to children who were gradually more bored, to grandchildren who were not yet born when the events described occurred and could not quite make the emotional connection that would give the stories weight. Abe's stories are funny in the show because they are digressive and absurd and frequently self-contradictory and often pivot unexpectedly to references that make no sense in context. But the stories are also real. The events happened within the show's continuity. They happened. Abe was there. Abe did those things. Abe experienced those years and those events and those losses and those moments of genuine heroism and genuine moral failure that the show occasionally surfaces from under the comedy. And nobody is listening. This is, quietly, one of the saddest things in Springfield. Not the radiation theory or the coma theory or any of the darker readings we have spent the evening exploring. Just an old man in a retirement home with 30 years of stories that nobody wants to hear, telling them anyway, Because the telling is the only remaining form of connection he has with what he used to be. Abe made a deal with Burns. This we have established. He covered up something Burns had done in exchange for Homer's job security. It is a deal he almost certainly made thinking he was protecting his son, protecting the boy who had already lost his mother and who needed, at minimum, reliable employment in the town where he had chosen to stay. Abe's deal was a father's calculation. It was the calculation of a man who could see that his son was damaged and was trying, in the only way available to him, to smooth the path. The calculation was wrong, not morally wrong. In the simple sense that Abe was acting in bad faith, he was acting in his son's interest, or what he perceived as his son's interest. But wrong in the deeper sense that the deal preserved Homer's damage rather than addressing it. By securing Homer's position at the plant regardless of merit, Abe ensured that Homer would never have to confront the fundamental unsustainability of his situation. Homer would always have the job. The job would never force him to grow, and the damage that made the job the only available option would never have to be addressed. Love can do this, parental love especially. It can create protection that prevents the growth that would make protection unnecessary. Abe's deal is the most Abe thing imaginable, a clumsy, well-intentioned act of protection that made things worse in ways Abe could not anticipate and would not have accepted if he had. And now Abe sits in the retirement home and tells his stories to empty rooms and makes periodic appearances in the main narrative, and is largely treated as a comedic accessory. He is the generation before the story, the one that made the choices that produced the story, and the story has moved past him without quite acknowledging what it owes him. Springfield has a habit of doing that to its older residents. Deep. Expansion. What Burns sees when he looks at Springfield. We have spent considerable time examining what Springfield has done to Burns, what his wealth and his radiation treatments and his century-plus of life have made him. But we have not fully examined what Burns sees when he looks at the town he has owned and operated for all these decades. Burns is not stupid. We have established this, but it bears dwelling on. Burns is, within the context of Springfield, operating at a cognitive level that most of the town's residents cannot match. He plans far ahead. He understands systems. He grasps the long-term implications of decisions in ways that Homer, for obvious reasons, and Wiggum, for his own reasons, and even many of the town's ostensibly intelligent residents simply cannot. This means Burns has seen Springfield from the outside, in a way. He has watched it from the elevated position that extreme wealth creates, not elevated morally or ethically, but epistemically. From where Burns sits, Springfield is legible in ways it is not legible to its residents. He can see the patterns. He can see how the system reproduces itself. He can see what the radiation is doing, because he knows radiation in the specific, intimate way of someone whose own body is being managed by it. What does that feel like? To be the oldest person in the room, the oldest person in any room in the entire country, very likely, and to understand the architecture of the place you have built, and to continue building it anyway? It would be easy to read Burns as simply evil. The show sometimes invites this reading. He does genuinely terrible things. He is responsible, directly and indirectly, for an enormous amount of suffering in Springfield. The radiation, Mona's exile, Homer's particular damage, the systematic suppression of anything that might challenge his authority, all of this traces back to Burns. But evil is a simple reading for a character who is complicated in ways that the show occasionally lets you glimpse. Burns is lonely. He has been lonely for a very long time. Smithers is loyal and indispensable and the closest thing Burns has to a genuine relationship, but Smithers is also an employee, and the power differential between them is so vast that genuine mutual intimacy of the kind that might address Burns's loneliness is structurally impossible. Burns cannot have friends. He is too powerful, too isolated, too much the apex of the system he has built for genuine friendship to exist. He has Smithers, he has his treatments, he has his empire, and he has the particular cold comfort of knowing that he has outlasted everyone he has ever known. Every rival, every peer, every person who was present at the beginning of his story, all of them gone. Burns, still here. What that does to a person across a century is something the show has never fully explored. It gestures at it occasionally, in moments when Burns's extraordinary age is used not for comedy but for something quieter and stranger. In the moments when Burns references the past as lived experience rather than history, When he mentions someone he knew who has been dead for decades as though the loss is still recent, because for Burns, who experiences time differently from everyone else around him, the loss is recent. He remembers it with the vividness that time has not yet softened. Burns is the most isolated person in Springfield. He is the person for whom the show's usual comforts, the family on the couch, the warmth of the bar, the ordinary human companionship of a shared daily life are simply not available. He has built a structure that makes him untouchable, and untouchable means exactly that. He cannot be touched, and he lives in that absence, surrounded by the empire he built, sustained by treatments that keep the loneliness running as long as everything else runs. He is too expensive to die, and perhaps too isolated to fully live. That, unexpectedly, might be the saddest thing in Springfield. Closing meditation. Going home. The Simpsons began with a family sitting down to watch television. The couch gag runs, they assemble, they sit, the television turns on, and then the show begins. There is something recursive about this. The audience sits down to watch a show about a family sitting down to watch a show. And in the 36 years since that first episode, the recursive loop has tightened to the point where the audience and the family have become, in some ways, the same gesture. We are doing what they are doing. We are settling in, finding our place, letting the familiar world of Springfield receive us. Every Simpsons episode begins with a family going home. The couch gag is, structurally, a homecoming ritual. The family assembles from their various locations, school and work and wherever Marge has been, and they come together on the couch. Every episode, regardless of what follows, begins with that gathering, that particular form of return. And every episode ends, implicitly or explicitly, with the family still intact. Whatever the episode put them through, the family is there at the end. The thread has been addressed or deferred, or simply left behind as the credits roll. The couch is still the couch. The house is still standing. We do this too, the audience. We come to Springfield because we need to go somewhere. We need to be received by something that will not change, that will be as we left it, that will hold us without demanding more than we have to give tonight. Springfield holds us. It has been holding us for 36 years. In the dark, at the end of long days, when the actual world has been too much and the relief of somewhere simpler and safer is not just wanted but needed, Springfield has been there. It will be there tomorrow. The loop holds. The family is on the couch. Homer is already asleep. And Springfield, contaminated, dreamed, denied, impossible, unlocatable, enduring, is doing what it has always done. Running, resetting, waiting for you to come back. You are already there. Sleep well. End full script complete. For 11 Labs narration, pace slowly. Pause after each section. Use a warm and calm tone throughout. Afterward, the mysteries we carry. Every show that runs long enough becomes something more than entertainment. It becomes a shared mythology, a set of characters and places and recurring situations that an audience carries with them outside the act of watching, that color the way they see other things, that surface in unexpected moments as reference points for understanding the actual world. The Simpsons has become this more completely than almost any other television program in history. Its characters are not just familiar, they are fluent. A generation of people uses Simpsons references the way earlier generations used idioms drawn from religion or classical literature. When something is pathetically desperate, it is Homer reaching for the donut. When something is frustratingly contradictory, it is the town that blocked out its own sun. When someone refuses to acknowledge a clear and obvious problem, they are Springfield, looking away from the three-eyed fish. The show has given its audience a language, and language shapes what you can think, what you can see, how you can describe what you observe. The Simpsons' vocabulary, the references, the archetypes, the recurring situations is part of how a significant portion of the world's population processes irony and contradiction and institutional failure, and the specific sadness of wanting something good and finding it harder to achieve than it should be. This is a remarkable thing to have given people. Not the laugh, though the laugh matters, the framework, the shared way of seeing, and the theories are part of this language now. The coma theory, the radiation theory, the floating timeline and the collective denial, and the immortal billionaire and the silent genius in the nursery. These readings of The Simpsons have become part of how people talk about the show, and through the show, about the world the show reflects. When someone says Springfield is a contamination zone, they might mean Springfield literally. But they might also mean something about the town they grew up in, the institution they work for, the system they live inside, the particular pollution, not necessarily radioactive, not necessarily physical, that has shaped the people around them in ways they are only beginning to understand. When someone says Homer is dreaming, they might be making a claim about the show's continuity. But they might also be sitting with something about the way we all construct the worlds we inhabit, the way consciousness generates a livable reality from whatever raw material it has, and how the thing we generate is inevitably shaped more by what we need than by what is precisely true. The theories are lenses. They are ways of making Springfield yield meaning beyond the surface. And the meaning they yield is not only about Springfield. It is about what Springfield was always about: the American family, the American town, the American system, the American capacity for both extraordinary warmth and extraordinary denial, the American habit of building things that are simultaneously beautiful and toxic, and then living inside them and calling them home. Springfield is home, even knowing what we know about it now. Maybe especially knowing what we know about it now. Because home is not a place that is perfect. Home is a place that holds you even when it should not be able to. A place that keeps its light on even when everything else has gone dark. A place that, no matter how far you travel or how long you have been away or how much you have changed since you last stood in its doorway, still recognizes you. Springfield recognizes you. It always has. You carry it with you everywhere, the way you carry anything you grew up with, the way you carry the sounds and the faces and the specific textures of the places that were present when you were becoming who you are. Springfield was there. However, it arrived in your life through childhood television, through a parent watching, through a streaming service at 2 a.m, through a clip shared online. Springfield arrived and it stayed. It stayed because it is that kind of place. The kind that stays. The loop holds. It always has. It always will. Good night.